Hey guys. Tonight we're drifting somewhere you've probably never imagined yourself waking up. On the creaking deck of a Viking longship. Right at the moment when the first pale stripe of dawn brushes across the edge of the medieval ocean. You're lying there, your body still stiff from the chill. Listening to the quiet slap of waves against the hull. The air smells like salt, wet wood, and the faintest hint of smoke from yesterday's cooking fire. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive out here. I mean, you complain when your hotel pillow is too firm. Try sleeping next to 30 unwashed warriors and see how long you last. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, go ahead and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start to push yourself up. The planks under your palms still damp from the night mist. Around you, the rest of the crew begins to stir. The Vikings don't wake up all at once, they rise in a slow, practical wave, each man stretching, yawning, and muttering in a half-awake growl as the morning light creeps over their faces. You hear a low groan from someone who clearly slept on the wrong rib of the ship, which is all of them. Really? Viking beds at sea? They didn't exist. Just your cloak, your body, and the hope that the person snoring next to you didn't roll onto your arm. You pull your cloak tighter as the wind cuts across the deck. It's early, too early for your modern sensibilities, but the longship doesn't wait for anyone to finish hitting an imaginary snooze button. There's no 5 more minutes here. The ocean doesn't care. The sun doesn't care. And the captain definitely doesn't care. He's already up, scanning the horizon like he's checking his social media feed. Except instead of memes, it's potential storms or enemy ships. As you stand, your legs sway ever so slightly with the gentle movement of the vessel. The longship rocks in a rhythm you're still not used to, steady but unpredictable. Like you're walking inside the stomach of a giant creature that hasn't decided whether it likes you yet. You step around coils of rope, wooden barrels, and shields stacked together along the railing. Everything has its place, and yet somehow everything looks like it's one strong wave away from tumbling overboard. One of the rowers, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, gives you a nod. His hair is a tangled mess. His beard full of secrets, and probably crumbs. He looks like he hasn't bathed in days. Which is accurate, and also the least surprising fact you'll hear tonight. Viking hygiene wasn't as bad as legends claim. But let's just say their deodorant options were limited. If you think gym locker rooms are rough, imagine 30 of these guys living on a boat for weeks. You take a breath through your mouth. You learn quickly. Someone nearby stretches and cracks his back so loudly it sounds like a branch snapping in the forest. Another crewman starts sharpening his seeks, his short dagger, because apparently nothing says, "good morning," like grinding metal. The scrape 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 of the blade rings through the air with a strangely soothing consistency. You notice how they prepare not with panic, not with hurry, but with a steady, practiced flow that comes from growing up around danger and unpredictability. One Viking, older, with deep lines carved into his face by wind and time, adjusts the woolen tunic beneath his cloak. You catch a glimpse of his boots, waterproofed with tallow, There's a strange comfort in seeing how every piece of clothing has a purpose. No fast fashion here. These garments are meant to endure salt, cold, rain, and the occasional explosion of seawater that drenches you head to toe without warning. Modern jackets claim to be water-resistant. Viking cloaks are everything-resistant, except for maybe Norway's tax rates. One historian joked about that once. But then again, historians still debate exactly how these early sailors waterproofed their gear. Animal fat? Beeswax? Magic? Okay, probably not magic, but still. Someone nudges you gently to move aside. They're preparing for the daily check of the longship, its frame, its ropes, its oars. Vikings did this constantly, because in the middle of the North Atlantic, a tiny crack in a plank isn't just an inconvenience, it's a disaster waiting to swallow you whole. You watch as they run their fingers across the wood, tapping it lightly. They listen in a way that reminds you of musicians tuning instruments. And in a way, that's exactly what the longship is, their instrument of survival. The smell of the sea strengthens as the wind shifts. Cold and briny, your hair whips across your face, and you squint into the early light. The sky is a soft wash of gray and gold, beautiful, but also undecided. Clouds gather at the horizon, thick and heavy like they're considering whether to ruin the day. You hear someone grumble in Old Norse, probably saying something like, "Great, more rain." Weather forecasting back then was essentially vibes plus experience. Some Vikings claimed they could smell storms coming, and you're not sure if they were boasting or genuinely half seagull. Even today, historians still argue about how reliable those old weather-reading methods actually were. You step toward the railing, your fingers brushing the cool wood. The sea stretches endlessly in every direction, no land, no markers, just shifting water and the longship's single carved dragon head cutting through it. You feel small, not just physically, but existentially, the way you do when you stare up at the night sky or realize you forgot your phone at home. Except here, losing your phone would be the least of your concerns. A young Viking, maybe barely older than 20, walks past carrying a small wooden bucket. He splashes seawater across the deck to clean it, humming softly under his breath. The melody is surprisingly gentle, a simple tune passed down from who knows where. It reminds you that despite their fearsome reputation, these were people living ordinary moments in extraordinary conditions. He glances at you and shrugs as though to say, "Someone's got to mop the floor." You smile, even though your teeth are chattering. The captain finally speaks, his voice calm but edged with purpose. He instructs the crew to prepare for the day's rowing once the winds die down. You can feel the shift in the atmosphere, the quiet discipline settling among the men. But there's also something else in the air, anticipation. You sense it the way you sense the beginning of a long journey. One that demands more from you than you expect. A raven circles overhead, an eerie silhouette against the brightening sky. One of the older sailors glances up and murmurs something about it being a good sign. Or maybe a bad sign. Hard to tell. Viking omens seem flexible depending on who's telling the story. And historians? They're still debating which omens were genuinely followed and which were added by later storytellers who just really loved dramatic birds. As the ship glides forward, you feel the morning settling into your bones. You're awake now, truly awake. standing among warriors who lived their lives between bravery and exhaustion, between myth and reality, between sunrise and the endless sea. And the day is only just beginning. You're barely fully awake when the first real smell of the morning hits you, a mix of dried fish, smoke, and something that might generously be described as prehistoric carbohydrates. It's breakfast time on a Viking longship, and no one is pretending it's glamorous. You watch as the crew begins gathering near a small shielded fire pit, a tiny, carefully maintained hearth built into a box of sand and stone slabs. It's a miracle the thing doesn't ignite the entire ship. But somehow the Vikings keep it under control. You figure it must be a combination of skill, luck, and the sheer intimidation of knowing you only get one boat. As you edge closer, you see a thick pot hanging over the low flames. Steam rises in lazy, curling ribbons, carrying a scent that's earthy. Maybe too earthy. When someone stirs it with a wooden ladle, you notice the texture, thick, lumpy, slightly beige, porridge, the universal breakfast of all people who didn't yet have croissants. This one is made from barley or oats, maybe with a few dried berries if the gods were kind. Based on the color today, the gods were apparently ambivalent. A Viking hands you a wooden bowl with a grunt. It's warm in your hands, which is nice, because your fingers still feel like they belong to someone else. You glance inside. The porridge looks like it has survived several battles already. You take a tiny bite. It's better than it looks, barely. A little smoky, a little chewy, a little, I hope this helps me survive the North Atlantic. The man next to you shovels in mouthfuls like he hasn't eaten in days. He probably hasn't eaten well in days. You follow his lead, telling yourself this is character building. Before you can finish your second bite, someone else tears a chunk from a dark, dense loaf of bread and hands it to you. Hard bread, baked long before the journey began. You tap it lightly and it gives the distinct sound of wood. You wonder if this counts as breakfast or as a self-defense tool. The Viking beside you shrugs, dips his piece into the porridge, and takes a bite so earnest it almost convinces you. Almost. You do the same. The moisture helps soften it, but only slightly. Your jaw is getting a historic workout. Then comes the dried fish, thin strips of preserved cod, salted enough to survive months. It smells sharp, aggressive even, like it's daring you to complain. The man who hands it to you gives a little nod, as if offering a delicacy. You take a nibble and immediately understand why Viking teeth wore down early. The chewiness requires determination, but the salt jolts you awake. And for a brief moment you kind of appreciate it. This is Viking espresso. Around you, the morning unfolds in a strangely peaceful rhythm. Men eat while sitting on their rolled-up cloaks or perched on crates. Some keep to themselves, focused on fueling up before the labor of rowing begins. Others laugh quietly, trading jokes you can't understand but can still appreciate from the tone, dry humor. Simple, about the ocean, the weather, or maybe whose snoring nearly summoned sea serpents last night. Someone passes a small leather pouch to another. It's filled with buttery lumps of something pale. You're curious until the smell reaches you. Fermented butter. Not quite rotten, not quite fresh. Just living in that complicated middle zone that makes modern food inspectors cry. The Vikings spread it on their bread like it's the height of luxury. Technically, for them, it is. A few offer you some. You hesitate. Their expectant faces leave you no choice. You try a bit. It tastes surprisingly good if you ignore the tang. But you're not brave enough to ask what stage of fermentation this batch is at. Nearby, a younger sailor adds a small handful of herbs to his bowl. You raise an eyebrow. Herbs? Out here? He tells you they pick them from coastal stops or dry them before journeys. A little touch of green in a sea of beige. It's a detail nobody imagines when they picture Vikings. And yet here it is. One tiny piece of evidence that they cared about flavor. Or at least variety. Some historians still debate how sophisticated Viking diets were on long voyages, arguing whether their meals were purely survival-based or if certain crews genuinely tried to eat, well, by their standards. A man with broad shoulders and a calm face sits nearby and begins cutting thin slices from a cured sausage. The smell is smoky, spicy, and instantly more appealing than everything else. He explains, in slow, patient gestures, that meat like this was a treasure brought from farms, smoked for weeks, and carried in wrapped bundles. They ration it carefully. You're not offered any. You understand. You wouldn't share either. You watch more bowls be filled from the porridge pot until it's nearly empty. Someone scrapes the bottom, making sure nothing goes to waste. On a longship, every calorie counts. They burn through energy the way your phone burns battery on max screen brightness. Between rowing, balancing, bracing against wind, and staying warm, the body doesn't get a single moment off. A few men lift small wooden cups toward their lips, drinking watered-down ale that's been sitting in barrels lashed to the center of the ship. It's weak, barely alcoholic, used mostly because it's safer than drinking random seawater or stagnant puddles collected on deck. You take a sip. It's sour, a little fizzy, and certainly not craft beer. But it's refreshing, and it washes down the porridge nicely. Suddenly, a shout rises from the bow. Two Vikings stand up, pointing toward the water. You follow their gaze and see a cluster of tiny fish shimmering near the surface. The excitement is immediate. Fresh fish means variety, flavor, and a break from the dried, salted monotony. Within moments, a couple of men grab nets and lean dangerously far over the side. Their movements are quick, practiced, fearless. A splash, a pull, and a small haul of wriggling silver bodies lands on deck. The longship erupts in a wave of satisfied murmurs. One of the older sailors kneels beside the fresh catch. With a small knife, he cleans the fish skillfully, tossing bits overboard for seagulls who have been watching with greedy enthusiasm. The gulls squawk, circling like fluffy opportunists. You swear one of them is glaring at you personally. Typical. The crew cooks the fish over the small fire, letting the skin crisp and the aroma fill the early morning air. You're lucky enough to receive half of one, still warm, tender, and impossibly good compared to everything else you've eaten so far. The contrast nearly brings a tear to your eye. Maybe that's the smoke, maybe it's emotion, who knows? As breakfast winds down, you notice the atmosphere shift again. The men stretch their shoulders, adjust their cloaks, and begin preparing the longship for motion. Someone hands out oars, someone else ties down the loose bundles. A couple of rowers exchange tired glances, the shared understanding of another long day ahead. Food hasn't filled their stomachs, It has simply lit the furnace. A breeze sweeps across the deck, carrying away the last traces of steam from the porridge pot. You take a final look around, the bowls being stacked, the fire being smothered, the bread being wrapped and stored, the barely awake faces turning into determined ones. Breakfast is over, and the sea is waiting. The warmth from breakfast fades quickly as the cold northern wind snakes its way across the deck, slipping under your cloak like an unwelcome guest. You shiver despite yourself. The Vikings barely react. For them, this icy slap of air is just another Tuesday. For you, it's a reminder that the medieval ocean doesn't believe in comfort. You pull your cloak tighter, as if wool alone can negotiate with the atmosphere, and follow the crew as they gather near the center of the longship. Someone feeds a few sticks into the tiny fire pit again, coaxing a thin flame to life. The light flickers against the wet planks, forming soft, golden halos on the wood. You crouch closer, grateful for the heat even though it's modest, almost apologetic, like a candle trying to warm a refrigerator. A Viking sitting beside you chuckles under his breath, as if he can sense you mentally bargaining with the universe for 3 more degrees of warmth. He adjusts his cloak and points toward the horizon, where a layer of pale mist hangs low over the water. That mist means colder winds are coming. Great. You watch as several crew members begin pulling out extra layers, shirts made of coarse wool, leggings reinforced with strips of leather, cloaks thick enough to double as winter bedding. Each piece is built for survival, not fashion, though if medieval runway shows existed, Viking winter wear might have stolen the show purely by intimidation. One man kneels down and unwraps a bundle containing small chunks of resin and wood shavings. He sprinkles them around the edge of the fire pit. A moment later, a soft crackling sound fills the air as the shavings catch flame, sending up a warm, sweet scent. Pine resin, sticky, smoky, and surprisingly comforting. You inhale and let it settle your nerves. You didn't expect to find peace in something that looks like tree dandruff. But here we are. A sailor next to you notices your interest and gestures for you to follow. He leads you toward the bow, where another group is preparing a second heat source, a small, shielded brazier designed to protect glowing coals. The coals radiate a deeper warmth, concentrated and steady. Vikings used them for heating tools, drying wet clothing, and occasionally roasting small bits of food that didn't require a full fire. You crouch beside it, feeling the subtle pulse of heat on your face. It's not much, but in the North Atlantic, this counts as luxury. Don't get too close. Someone mutters, "You'll burn your cloak." You lean back immediately. The man grins, he's amused, not scolding. You realize this is one of those light, teasing moments common on long voyages. 3 jokes per day seems to be the Viking emotional minimum. You're already contributing to their quota without meaning to. Still, you watch with fascination as the crew tends to their warming stations. It's a dance of necessity. Maintain heat without risking fire. Dry clothing without scorching it. And keep hands from stiffening before rowing begins. You stretch your fingers and feel how cold they've already become. One Viking notices, grabs your hands, and rubs them briskly between his palms. His hands feel like rough leather, warm and steady. He nods at you, no words. Just a silent acknowledgement that frozen fingers do nobody any good out here. You glance around and notice that not all heat comes from fire. Some Vikings wear fur-lined hoods or caps pulled low over their ears. Made from fox, hare, or sheep, others wrap thick belts around their wool tunics to trap body heat. A few even wear shirts woven so tightly they could block wind as well as most modern jackets. Once again, you're reminded that these people weren't careless brutes. They were masters of cold weather survival. If anyone understood winter, it was them. A man nearby lifts a pouch and starts rubbing something thick and greasy onto his boots. You raise an eyebrow. He notices and holds the pouch open for you. The smell hits instantly. Animal fat mixed with some faint herbal note. It's waterproofing. They apply it regularly to keep their boots from soaking up seawater. You dip a finger into the mixture, surprised by how warm it feels. The Viking laughs softly, probably amused that you're fascinated by something he's done since childhood. It's one of those small, humanizing details people rarely think about when picturing fierce warriors on longships. Another crewman approaches you, holding up something odd-looking, a small ball of dark wool stuffed with herbs. He presses it into your hand. It's warm, very warm. You blink, confused. He explains in broken words and gestures that it's a herbal heat ball, wool soaked in heated animal fat mixed with crushed plants. The fat holds warmth, and the herbs produce a calming smell when warmed. Vikings tucked them under their cloaks or even held them in their hands during colder nights. You never imagined the same people who raided monasteries also invented medieval hand warmers. But here we are. While you absorb this surprising detail, someone else unrolls a long strip of cloth and begins wrapping it around his torso beneath his tunic. Layering, practical, effective, and historically overlooked. Some historians still debate just how sophisticated Viking layering techniques were. Whether these wraps were used universally or only in specific regions. Watching it happen right before your eyes makes you appreciate how much of history hides in simple routines. As you stand there, warmed slightly by fire, wool, and the quiet camaraderie of people who have accepted the ocean as a roommate. The wind suddenly rises. It sweeps across the deck, cutting through gaps in your clothing with pinpoint precision. You flinch. The Vikings barely notice. One of them pats your shoulder sympathetically, as if saying, "Yes, the wind is rude today." The captain calls out orders, his voice steady despite the gusts. The men respond immediately, adjusting shields along the rails to block crosswinds. Tightening ropes, securing loose bundles, you help where you can. Though your efforts are more symbolic than useful. Still, they appreciate your willingness. They understand that learning to survive the cold isn't something you master instantly. Their world is built on resilience shaped by time. You watch as a Viking uses a heated stone wrapped in linen to warm his hands. Another slips one under his cloak. A third carefully dries the inside of his gloves by holding them a safe distance above the brazier. Nothing is wasted, no heat, no warmth, no opportunity to stay alive. Someone hands you a cup of warm broth, thin, salty, but blessedly hot. You take a sip and feel the heat spread through your chest. It's astonishing how quickly your body responds. The Vikings drink this often during cold spells. Not for taste, but for survival. As the wind continues to howl, you realize something profound. The Vikings weren't fearless because they ignored the cold. They were fearless because they respected it, met it with preparation, consistency, and 1,000 little tricks passed down through generations. The longship creaks, groans, and shifts beneath your feet. You tuck the herbal heat ball under your cloak, grateful for every flicker of warmth. The day hasn't even properly begun, but already you understand why surviving the medieval ocean required more than muscle. It required wisdom, and you're only just beginning to learn it. The warmth you managed to collect between the herbal heat ball, the thin broth, and the shy little fire doesn't last long. The captain's voice rolls across the deck like a rumbling wave. Short and clipped. Rowers are needed, which really means everyone is needed. On a Viking longship, rowing isn't some occasional gym exercise, it's the backbone of the journey. The daily grind, the medieval equivalent of a full-body workout class that no one can opt out of. You watch as the men move toward their oars with the weary acceptance of people who have long ago made peace with discomfort. Some crack their knuckles, others stretch their backs, a few simply sigh, the quiet, philosophical kind of sigh that says, "Well, the ocean isn't going to cross itself." Someone hands you an oar. It's heavier than you expect, long, smooth, polished by countless hands, dense enough that you feel its weight all the way down to your bones. You grip it awkwardly. A Viking beside you chuckles, adjusts your hands for you, and taps the wood as if introducing you to a new friend. "Strong," he says. Then he taps your arm. Maybe later. You laugh, because honestly, fair enough. The crew settles into place, each man dropping onto a small wooden bench. These benches are the definition of minimalism, flat, narrow, and clearly designed by someone who believed cushions were a sign of moral weakness. You sit too, feeling the wood bite into you. Vikings must have had steel spines, or no nerve endings. The call goes out. A single drumbeat echoes from the center of the ship. Thump, thump, steady. Patient, ancient. The Vikings don't use drums often at sea. But when they do, the sound threads itself through the air like a guide rope. You feel it in your ribs before you hear it in your ears. Then the rowing starts. The oars dip into the water in near-perfect unison, slicing through the surface with a smooth, rhythmic whisper. SCHHK, SCHHK, SCHHK. The ship lurches forward, gaining momentum with every synchronized pull. You try to match the rhythm. It feels simple at first, almost soothing, but after the first dozen strokes, reality sets in. This is hard. Very hard. Every pull demands strength in your shoulders, your back, your arms, your core, basically every muscle you've ever ignored on leg day. The Vikings row as if their bones were carved from oak. Their movements are fluid but powerful. The practiced motions of men who have spent a lifetime working with wind, water, and wood. You glance around and notice something interesting. Despite their reputation for brutality, there's no yelling, no angry orders, no showing off. They row like a living machine, each man tuned to the others. Each stroke guided by years of understanding how to survive together on a boat barely wider than your living room. The man beside you leans close and murmurs something in Old Norse. His tone is teasing. You only catch one familiar word, slow. You give a dramatic eye roll, which he finds hilarious. That's joke number one for the day. Vikings seem to enjoy light suffering humor. Maybe because it's their entire lifestyle. As the rowing continues, the rhythm settles into your body. Your muscles start to warm. Your breath deepens, and the sting of the cold fades. There is something strangely meditative about it, this unity of movement. This steady fight against the weight of the world's water. You feel, for a moment, like you're part of something ancient and powerful. But then the ocean reminds you who's in charge. A wave hits the side of the ship, spraying everyone in a crisp sheet of icy water. You gasp as it slaps your face and seeps down your collar. The Vikings barely react. One mutters something that sounds like refreshing, which is deeply concerning. You're beginning to suspect they might actually enjoy suffering on a philosophical level. Still, the oars rise and fall, cutting through the choppy surface. The ship glides forward in long, steady strides. The drumbeat grows slightly faster, urging the crew onward. Your shoulders burn, your hands ache, your breath comes quicker. You fight the oar, and the oar fights back. The Vikings? They look like they're just warming up. A sailor in the front begins singing, low, rhythmic chant in a voice that crackles like firewood. Others join in. The melody grows, deepening into a chorus that melds with the rowing beat. It's not for entertainment, it's for calibration. Every sound pulls the men into tighter unison. You feel the rhythm tug at you too, syncing your movement not just to the drum, but to the breath of everyone around you. The song shifts at one point, breaking into a faster pace. For a moment, you think they're showing off. But no, this is communication. When the waves grow unpredictable, the rowers adjust their speed in songs that double as coded warnings. Some historians still debate how structured these chants were, whether they were true systems of signals or simply improvised by the crew. But sitting here, feeling the ship respond to every shift of tone, you're convinced the truth is somewhere beautifully in between. Your arms tremble. Your fingers slip slightly on the oar. A rower behind you gives a sharp whistle. And you correct your angle. You're learning, slowly, painfully, but learning. Another wave slams against the hull. This one harder. The ship dips, but the crew doesn't break rhythm. A Viking in the back mutters something dry and sarcastic that makes half the rowers laugh. You don't know what he said, but you're pretty sure it translates to, "Is that all you've got?" directed at the ocean. Viking humor is bold. Eventually, the drumbeat slows. One final thump, and the oars lift from the water. The crew exhales collectively. The tension releases from your muscles so suddenly that you almost drop your oar. A Viking catches it before it smacks your foot. "Careful," he says, grinning. Oar wins. Your hands are trembling. Your arms feel like warm noodles. Your lower back is filing a complaint with the medieval HR department. And yet, despite everything, you feel strangely proud. You rowed. Not well, but you rowed. The ship now glides on its own momentum, slicing quietly through softer waves. Some Vikings rest their oars across their knees. Others stretch, shrugging off the ache in casual, practiced motions. A few smack each other on the back in rough congratulations. One man hands you a small strip of dried fish. "Good work," he says. You accept it, even though your whole body is vibrating. You chew, letting the salt replenish the strength you left somewhere in the last 500 strokes. You look out at the endless expanse of gray-blue sea, feeling both very small and strangely connected to this rugged, relentless world. The rhythm of rowing still pulses faintly in your arms, like a heartbeat you borrowed from the ocean. And as you breathe in the cold air, you realize this truth. Vikings didn't conquer the seas because they were strong. They conquered them because they were together. And you are just beginning to understand what that truly means. The longship settles into a calmer glide, the oars pulled in for now, leaving only the wind and the steady push of the current to carry you forward. Your arms are still humming from the relentless rowing, somewhere between a proud ache and a cry for help. But the Vikings treat their exhaustion like old friends. A few stretch lazily, rolling their shoulders. One cracks his neck so loudly you jump. He grins at your expression. That's today's gentle reminder that these men have spines made of ironwood. As the hum of exertion fades, something shifts among the crew. They begin turning their faces upward, scanning the sky with a practiced patience. Others stand near the sides of the longship, studying the color of the water, the movement of waves, and the direction of the wind. You watch all these quiet gestures with curiosity until someone finally says the word that unlocks the scene for you. Navigate. It comes out almost casually, as if navigation were nothing more than a light morning chore. But here, out on a medieval ocean with no satellites, no compasses, no GPS lady telling you to turn left, it's everything. This is how they survive. One of the older sailors climbs onto a small raised plank near the bow. His beard is streaked with white, his eyes sharp as a hawk's, and his stance steady despite the rocking deck. He looks up, not at clouds, but through them, as if searching for something invisible to you. His gaze settles on the position of the rising sun. He tilts his head slightly, calculating angles so effortlessly that you wonder if he's secretly a human sundial. You squint up too, pretending you know what you're looking at. You don't. A Viking next to you smirks and shakes his head, gently turning your shoulders so you're facing the correct direction. Like this, he says, pointing with two fingers, one toward the sun, the other toward the faint shimmer of land far, far behind you. You nod seriously as if you've learned something profound. You have not. The longship's navigator gestures for others to gather. A small group forms around him, listening intently as he murmurs short instructions. You can't understand the words, but you catch the cadence, calm, confident, familiar. His hand sweeps across the horizon as he describes what lies ahead: wind patterns, currents, and markers in the sky. If Google Maps had a Viking mode, this is the guy it would be based on. You notice the way he studies the water, leaning in to observe how the sunlight reflects off its surface. The color tells him the depth. The movement tells him the current. The temperature tells him whether land might be near or far. At one point, he even scoops up a handful of seawater and tastes it. You stare at him, horrified. He shrugs. Salt tells story. He explains. You decide you don't need that story personally. Someone else points toward the sky, and your eyes follow. A flock of seabirds spirals overhead, riding the wind with effortless grace. The crew watches them closely. Birds mean land, though not necessarily nearby, and not always the kind of land you want. You hear a few men debate in low voices about the species. Their opinions differ. Some say these birds stay close to shore, while others insist they can travel far out to sea. Historians still debate this too, unsure exactly how Vikings interpreted bird behavior. But for the men around you, the discussion isn't academic, it's about survival, timing, and trust in nature's clues. The navigator continues his silent symphony. He pulls out a wooden sun compass, a small disc with carved lines and a central knob casting a faint shadow. You recognize it from old illustrations, but seeing it in use feels surreal. He rotates it slowly, aligning markings with the sun. The shadow shifts. He nods. Information. Gathered. Course. Confirmed. Another Viking kneels nearby with a sack full of ravens. Yes. Actual ravens. You blink twice, unsure if your brain is tricking you. But no, the bag moves. Rustling, and one of the birds lets out a sharp, offended caw. Ravens were sometimes used as navigation tools. Release one. Watch where it flies. If it circles back, land is nowhere close. If it shoots off confidently in one direction, well, that's where you want to go. Tonight they won't release one. But it's comforting and slightly alarming to know that your navigation backup system is a flapping, opinionated bird. A younger rower stands at the rail, his fingers skimming the edge of the water. He lifts his hand and studies the droplets clinging to his skin. Cold from the north, he murmurs. His voice is thoughtful, not worried. You try the same, dipping your fingers into the sea. The cold bites instantly, sharper than you expected. You snatch your hand back with an undignified gasp. He laughs, a soft, friendly sound, another joke for the day. At your expense, you're getting used to it. As you move across the deck, you notice several sailors staring toward a faint line on the horizon, darker than the sea, lighter than the sky. A cloud bank? A sign of land? A trick of light? The Vikings murmur among themselves, comparing impressions. The longship creaks as it shifts direction slightly, responding to a new decision among the navigator and his helpers. You feel the turn more than you see it, a subtle change in the tilt beneath your feet. As if the ship itself agreed with their analysis. The navigator glances up again, searching for the sun now half veiled behind passing clouds. The sky is moody, shifting between clarity and fog like it can't decide what personality to commit to. You watch the Vikings adapt, adjusting tiny details in their course. They read the sky the way you read notifications, quickly, constantly, automatically. A man with a braided beard approaches you and taps your chest lightly with 2 fingers. Eyes everywhere, he says, pointing all around you. Ocean gives signs. You nod, absorbing the advice. Out here, awareness is survival. Nothing is random. Not the wind, not the waves, not the color of the sky, not the flight of birds, not the temperature of seawater. Everything is data, ancient, instinctive data. A sudden gust catches your cloak and flutters it behind you like a dramatic cape. One Viking laughs, another claps you on the back, a third gestures toward the wind direction and says something that sounds like helpful cloak. You're providing entertainment without meaning to. Maybe this longship needed a comedic relief character. The sea shifts to a deeper shade of blue as the morning stretches on. The waves become calmer, gliding under the hull like long, patient breaths. The navigator nods approvingly. You feel the change too, not just in the motion of the ship, but in the energy of the crew. There's confidence now, certainty, even pride. For a moment, you imagine living life like this, guided not by screens or satellites, but by the sky, the water, the birds, and the silent pulse of the world around you. It's unsettling and soothing at once. You close your eyes, listening to the water slide along the hull. The ship points forward, steady and sure. And under the Viking sun, you begin to see the ocean the way they do, not as chaos, but as a map written in wind and light. The morning light has settled into a steady, silver glow across the ocean when you notice a subtle shift in the crew. The navigator lowers his sun compass. The rowers begin securing their oars. But it's not rest they're preparing for. There's a tension in the air, thin, humming, like a string pulled tight. You hear a murmur ripple through the longship. Quiet enough not to cause panic but serious enough that even you straighten your posture instinctively. A Viking near you sniffs the wind, frowns, and mutters something short and grim. Another taps the side of the hull, listening to the sound. A third stares at the sky with narrowed eyes. You don't need a translation. You've been here long enough to understand. Something is coming. Storm. Or at least the kind of storm that makes Vikings brace themselves with the resigned acceptance of people about to face nature's version of a poorly planned surprise party. One of the older crewmen gestures for you to follow him toward the center of the ship. As you approach, you see the beginning of a ritual, calm, efficient, almost mechanical. They're preparing food, not eating it yet, preparing it, because once the storm hits, nobody will be cooking anything unless they want their pot of porridge to spontaneously become a projectile. A Viking lifts a lid off a wide wooden box and reveals bundles of dried food, fish, bread so stiff it could double as armor plating, strips of smoked meat, and small leather bags filled with nuts and berries. This is the storm pantry, a collection of everything that can be eaten quickly, safely, and with minimal fuss. You watch them sort through the supplies, dividing portions into smaller bundles and tying them with twine made from tough animal sinew. The smell of smoked meat drifts upward. It's sharp, woody, comforting and alarming at once. Comforting, because it's food. Alarming, because Vikings only break out the good stuff when circumstances demand it. One man uses a stone to crack apart a large hunk of preserved butter, hard, pale, slightly waxy, and divides it among the bundles. You remember tasting some earlier and still aren't entirely sure if it was food or a moral challenge. But in a storm, fat is survival. The higher the calories, the better. A younger Viking hands you a bundle. It's surprisingly heavy, filled with dried cod, a chunk of hard cheese, some bread, and a small pouch of ale thickened with grain. You raise your eyebrows. He nods, as if communicating a full paragraph with one expression. Keep this. When the storm hits, you'll thank me. You don't argue. Across the deck, two crewmen kneel beside an iron cauldron suspended over glowing coals. They're making a thicker than usual stew, a dense mash of grains, fish scraps, root vegetables, and enough salt to mummify a goat. The smell isn't exactly delicious, but it's sturdy, nourishing, storm-proof. You watch one of them sprinkle dried herbs into the pot. His movements are delicate, almost tender. Vikings may have been warriors, but they cooked with a surprising amount of care. Good before storm, he says, stirring slowly. warm you inside. You nod and lean closer to the heat. It's soothing in a way you didn't know you needed. Someone touches your shoulder. Another Viking hands you a wooden cup filled with warm broth, a pre-storm ritual. You sip cautiously. It's salty, savory, oddly grounding, as if the liquid itself is reminding you that storms can be survived. That warmth can outlast cold. That this longship is more than wood and oars, it's a lifeline. Then you feel it. A shift in the wind. Not stronger, not colder, just different, like the air suddenly remembered it has somewhere to be. The Vikings notice instantly. Heads snap up, conversations stop, someone whistles sharply. The crew springs into motion so quickly you almost fall backward. This is not panic. This is not fear. This is choreography. A choreographed dance of men who have spent years learning how to prepare for the ocean's temper tantrums. Two sailors begin tying down every loose object on the ship: barrels, bundles, cloaks, tools, anything not nailed or lashed to something else. A third man locks down the shields lining the rails, ensuring they won't fly off when the wind rises. Others roll the sail tighter and secure it with ropes as thick as your wrist. A rope is shoved into your hands. Hold, a Viking instructs. You grip it instinctively while he ties a knot, a complex interlocking pattern that looks like a cat's cradle on steroids. When he's done, he nods once. Approval. A wave slaps the hull harder than before. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough to say, "Hello, I'm coming." You see the horizon darkening. The sky shifts to a bruised blue-gray. Clouds forming like distant mountains rolling toward you. The wind sharpens. Your cloak snaps like a banner. The herbal heat ball under it suddenly feels like a hopeful little ally. You glance at the Vikings. Their faces are alert, focused, but strangely calm. This isn't bravado, it's experience. They've survived storms that would make modern sailors cry into their inflatable life vests. One man notices you watching the sky and leans close. "Storm meals," he says, gesturing at the bundles. "We eat fast. No cook later." You nod, clutching your bundle like it's a medieval lunchbox of courage. Another Viking taps his temple. "Storm makes mind tricky," he says, rotating his hand in a wobbly motion. "Eat now. Think better later." The stew is ladled into bowls. It's thick enough to stay put even while the ship rocks harder. You take a spoonful. It's hearty, warming, and tastes faintly of smoke and survival. Vikings eat quickly, efficiently, without wasting a single drop. Food is fuel, not ceremony. A wave hits harder, splashing several rowers. One shakes the water out of his beard and mutters something sarcastic that makes everyone laugh. You don't understand the words, but the tone is universal. "Really? Already?" Another wave slams the starboard side. The deck tilts slightly. Barrels rattle. Ropes creak. A few Vikings brace themselves instinctively. You do the same, gripping a beam with both hands. The storm is near. Someone stuffs extra dried fish into your bundle for strength, he says. Another hands you a small cloth pouch filled with crushed herbs. He mimes breathing it in. "Good for nerves." You thank him. You're proud you managed it without your voice cracking. The captain walks down the length of the longship, checking knots and encouraging the crew. He doesn't shout. He speaks softly, firmly, His presence alone steadies the air around him. You watch the men respond to him with a mix of trust and respect that runs deeper than simple hierarchy. A sudden gust hits the ship sideways. You stagger. 2 hands grab you, one on each arm, steadying you effortlessly. The Vikings exchange a brief grin as if to say, "We've got you. Welcome to the team." The wind picks up again. Louder now. Faster. The first raindrop lands on your cheek, cold. Sharp. Like a warning touch. The storm hasn't arrived yet. But it's close enough to taste in the air. And as the Vikings secure the last of their supplies, tightening ropes and double-checking knots, you realize the truth. They don't prepare for storms because they fear them. They prepare because they expect them. Because the medieval ocean never promised safety, only survival to those ready to meet its fury. And now, so are you. The first raindrops fall like cold pins against your skin, sharp, scattered, testing the edges of the longship as though the storm wants to introduce itself politely before slamming the door open. The Vikings react without flinching. You suspect they have an emotional scale in which light rain ranks somewhere between barely noticed and pleasant spa mist. For you, though, each drop feels like a tiny slap from nature. The sky darkens in slow, brooding layers, gray sliding into steel, steel sliding into a kind of deep, angry blue. The air thickens, the wind sharpens. You hear the timbers groan as if the ship is taking a deep breath in preparation. And then the first real wave hits. It's not a monstrous towering wall of doom like the movies show. It's worse, because it's real. Solid, heavy. It lifts the longship in one smooth motion, tilting your stomach into your throat, and then drops it with a wet boom that rattles the bones inside you. The deck shudders. You grab the nearest rope in self-defense. Because gravity has suddenly developed a sick sense of humor. A Viking beside you plants his feet, wide and steady, like he has roots instead of legs. He glances at your white-knuckled grip and smirks. "Good, hold strong," he says, then casually wipes seawater from his beard as if it's nothing more than morning dew. Another wave crashes against the side of the ship, this one higher. Angrier. The spray explodes upward, drenching the rowers. They laugh. One shakes his head, muttering something that sounds suspiciously like complaining about getting wet. You stare at him, baffled. You're on a boat, in a storm, in the medieval North Atlantic. Being wet should be expected. But clearly Vikings need to complain at least once a day to maintain emotional balance. The drum starts up again, not for rowing, but for rhythm, for unity. Low, steady beats that keep the crew grounded as the world around you tilts and heaves. You feel the vibrations through the planks under your feet. Thump, thump, thump. The storm doesn't silence them. The storm just becomes background noise. A wave slams the bow, spraying everyone at the front. A rower yells something triumphant, like he's challenging the sea to try harder. Another wave hits, bigger this time, tilting the longship to the side. You stagger. A hand grabs your cloak, steadying you before you slide halfway across the deck. The man grins. Feet wide, he says, demonstrating like a teacher correcting your posture in a yoga class you didn't voluntarily sign up for. You spread your feet the way he shows you. Suddenly, your balance improves. A little. Tiny steps. Baby Viking steps. The wind roars louder now, a rolling, howling sound that wraps around your cloak and threatens to peel you off the deck like a sticker on a lunchbox. Your hair slaps your face. The rain grows heavier, blending with the spray of the waves until you can't tell sky from sea. The Vikings begin their storm routine, an unspoken, perfectly synchronized set of movements. Half brace the oars, half secure the cargo. A few watch the horizon, gauging which waves will hit hardest. Their coordination is uncanny. They don't yell orders. They don't panic. They simply move. One man crouches near the fire pit and douses the coals. No cooking during storms unless you want accidental explosions. Another checks the lashings on the shields. They shift position, using the shields as partial wave breakers, adjusting angles to deflect incoming spray. You watch them work and can't help but feel a strange admiration. It's like watching an orchestra perform a symphony written by the weather. A massive wave rises ahead, a dark, towering shape that looks more like a creature than water. Your breath catches. The Vikings brace. Someone shouts a warning. The wave crashes into the hull with a force that sends water pouring over the deck like a dumped barrel. You gasp as the cold engulfs your feet and soaks your legs. A Viking claps you on the back, nearly knocking the air out of you. Cold good, he yells over the roar. Keeps you awake. You nod because you can't think of a better response. The ship rises again, carried on another massive swell. The world tilts, sky, sea, deck, all spinning in a dizzying, nauseating cycle. You clutch the rope harder. Your stomach does a flip. A Viking hands you a tiny sprig of dried herb and gestures for you to sniff it. You do. It's sharp, fresh, minty, good for sickness, he says. Breathe. You inhale again. It helps. Slightly. You mentally add Viking aromatherapy to the list of things you didn't expect to experience today. The waves tighten into a chaotic rhythm, slamming, lifting, dropping, slamming again. The longship groans, but it holds. It's flexible. Overlapping planks bend and adjust with each impact. Viking shipbuilders knew what they were doing. This boat isn't fighting the storm, it's dancing with it. You watch the men move with the same instinctive grace. One braces against the mast. Another adjusts a rope. A third jumps to help when a barrel shifts dangerously near the edge. They shout to one another. Not in fear, but coordination. The storm doesn't intimidate them, it energizes them. This is their battlefield, their workplace, their childhood playground all rolled into one. At one point, a wave hits so unexpectedly that it knocks a rower off balance. You panic, but another sailor grabs him, steadies him, and pats his shoulder. The fallen rower shakes his head, laughing at himself, and makes a gesture that you're pretty sure means the ocean cheated. Lightning flickers in the distance, pale and crackling, like a vein in the sky. Thunder follows, rumbling slowly across the water. The Vikings glance at it but don't react. One mutters something like, far, meaning, not close enough to worry about yet. You lean your head back and breathe through the cold and the motion and the fear. The storm rages. The longship trembles. But it moves forward, never sideways. Never spinning. Always plunging through the chaos with stubborn, almost arrogant determination. You start to understand something profound. The Vikings didn't just endure storms. They expected them. They lived with them, worked with them, even learned from them. Some historians still debate how much storm lore Vikings preserved, whether certain patterns of waves, winds, and sounds guided their decisions. Watching them now, you suspect the truth is simple. Their knowledge came from surviving thousands of storms, one wave at a time. A particularly violent crash of water sends spray across your face. You wipe it away and realize, unexpectedly, that your fear has eased. Not gone, just steadier, calmer. The Vikings have shared something with you through their actions, an unspoken belief that storms are meant to be faced, not fled. When the next big wave rises, you brace alongside them, feet wide, knees loose, hands firm. The wave hits, the ship shudders. You are still standing. Not gracefully, not heroically, but still standing. And for the first time, the storm doesn't feel like an enemy. It feels like part of the journey. The storm doesn't end so much as it slowly decides you've suffered enough. The waves shrink from giants to restless hills. The wind softens from a shriek to a grumble. The rain thins into a cool mist that clings to your eyelashes. And somewhere in that gradual unwinding, you realize the world around you has turned dim, blue-gray and quiet. The kind of stillness that comes after chaos has burned itself out. A Viking near you exhales long and loud, shoulders slackening as if the storm's weight had been sitting directly on them. Another wipes rain from his beard with a low chuckle, muttering something that sounds like, "too easy," even though you're pretty sure the storm nearly peeled your soul out of your body. Vikings process experiences differently. You're starting to accept that. But as the noise fades, a new kind of alertness spreads through the crew. Not adrenaline, awareness. The storm may be over, but the danger of the deep night is just beginning. Night aboard a Viking longship is not peaceful. It is not safe. It's not even properly dark. It's a strange, shifting shadow world where the ocean becomes a black mirror and the sky melts into it until you can't tell where the water ends or the air begins. A place where sound spreads strangely, carrying whispers farther than they should go. You don't need anyone to tell you the mood has changed. You feel it. A Viking claps you on the back, gentle, reassuring, like a silent, "You survived." Then he points toward the stern, where a small group is already assembling. The Night Watch, guardians of the dark hours. Their job: stay awake, listen, look, and keep everyone alive until dawn decides to show up again. There's no rotation chart, no written system, no clipboard with checkboxes. They simply know whose turn it is. A few stretch their arms. One rolls his neck. Another tightens his cloak and checks the edge of his seeks. Quiet readiness. A Viking beckons you forward. "Come," he says softly. You hear stories. You follow him to the stern, where the first of the Night Watch fires glows inside a shielded stone bowl. The flame is small and almost furtive, as though it knows it shouldn't be here but is trying to help anyway. The light flickers across the men's faces, turning their features into warm, shifting silhouettes. Someone hands you a fur-lined cloth to wrap around your shoulders. You accept it gratefully. You didn't think you could be colder. But the night air proves you wrong within seconds. It's the kind of cold that sneaks in, not instantly, but gradually, coiling around your ribs and slipping under your clothes like a patient little thief. The ship creaks. A low groan that echoes across the deck. A Viking taps the railing and listens. Good, he murmurs. Ship strong. You're glad someone knows how to interpret boat noises. Because to you it all sounds like ominous foreshadowing. The ocean is quieter too now. But not silent. It breathes. Long, slow sighs of waves brushing the hull. Each one whispering secrets you can't quite understand. A Viking sitting near the bow gestures toward it. Ocean talks more at night. He says, you listen, sometimes warn you. You're not sure whether he means the water literally warns people or if this is a poetic metaphor. With Vikings, it could genuinely be either. The night watch settles into place. 2 at the bow, 2 at the stern, others along the sides. Their eyes scan the distance. Not for land. Nothing that lucky, but for glimmers. Shapes. Movements. The night hides things the day has the decency to show you. Floating debris. Sudden waves. Drifting logs. Other ships. And the occasional very confused whale. You sit with them, your body pressed against a shield for warmth. Someone passes around a small leather flask. You take a sip. It's strong, something fermented and smoky. Your nose burns, but your chest warms. A rower chuckles softly at your reaction. Then the stories begin. Not loud, not dramatic, just murmured threads of sound woven into the darkness. Vikings don't sit around telling tales for entertainment. They tell them because the night asks for stories the way the fire asks for fuel. One man begins with a tale about a sailor who fell asleep during his watch and woke to find the ship drifting dangerously close to jagged rocks. Ocean angry. The man says, "Take you fast if you dream wrong." You nod solemnly, pretending you understand the full meaning. The next sailor adds that sleeping on watch can summon spirits of the deep who drag dreamers overboard. Everyone laughs, but it's the kind of laugh that covers something older. Unspoken, a fear shared by those who've spent too many nights staring into black water. Tonight's mood is softer, though. The storm took the sharpest edge off their nerves. Now, as the ship rocks gently, the Vikings drift into stories of superstition, some playful, some serious. The sea has eyes, one says, pointing to the water. Too many, another replies. A third leans in and whispers. If you stare long enough, it stares back. You swallow, hard. Someone else talks about strange lights they once saw hovering above the water, glowing green flames that danced like spirits. Saint Elmo's fire, perhaps, or maybe something less scientific and more Viking. You catch him grinning as he adds, "If they touch the mast, it means the gods are watching." You're not sure if that's comforting or deeply unsettling. The next man shares a quieter story about how sailors believed the voices of lost comrades could be heard in the waves on especially dark nights. "Listen," he says, tilting his head. "You do." The ocean sighs. A soft shush, shush. It almost sounds like breathing. Or whispering. You adjust your cloak a little tighter. Of course, Vikings have a sense of humor too. One rower taps you and says, "If you hear someone calling your name from the water, don't answer." Ocean loves new friends. He waggles his eyebrows dramatically. The others burst into quiet laughter. You roll your eyes, but your pulse bumps up anyway. Still, between the eerie tales and the gentle teasing, there's comfort here, an intimacy formed in shared vulnerability. Night watch isn't just a chore. It's communion, memory, ritual. Someone points upward. Stars show way, he says. You tilt your chin and see them, thin, scattered points of silver cutting through gaps in the clouds. They look faint, fragile, almost shy, but the Vikings read them effortlessly. A rower begins reciting star names you've never heard. Some real, some probably invented mid-sentence. You smile. Far off in the dark, a soft splash catches your attention. Your muscles tense. A Viking holds up a hand, not alarmed, just alert. The group listens. Another splash, something surfacing, water breathing. Then, through the dimness, you see a curved back break the surface, smooth, massive, silent. A whale. The Vikings exhale in awe, soft smiles breaking across their tired faces. To them, it's a good sign, a calm presence, a guardian of the deep. One whispers, "Whale keeps watch too." The creature disappears again, leaving ripples that shimmer in the faint starlight. The longship drifts onward, guided by whispers, memories, and the steady vigilance of the night watch. You nestle deeper into your cloak. The story's still echoing in your mind. The fear remains, but it's softened by companionship. Here, in the hush of the medieval ocean, you understand something. Night doesn't belong to darkness. It belongs to the ones who stay awake. And tonight, you're one of them. The night gradually thins into a pale, bluish dawn, the kind that arrives quietly, as if afraid to interrupt whatever the darkness was whispering. The longship rocks gently now, cradled by calmer waters. Your eyelids feel heavy from the long vigil. But the Vikings around you rise with the kind of energy that shouldn't be legal after a sleepless night. They stretch, crack their knuckles, and get right back to work. Because rest is a luxury the ocean rarely offers twice. You stand, legs stiff and wobbly, feeling like someone replaced your bones with damp ropes. A Viking pats your shoulder as he passes by. "Good watch," he says, and even though he might just be being polite, you feel a small glow of pride warm your chest. But morning peace doesn't last long. A sharp crack echoes from somewhere toward the bow, so sudden and unfamiliar that you jolt instinctively. The Vikings freeze only for a second, just long enough to identify the sound, then move as a unit toward the source. You follow, weaving between bundles and barrels, your heartbeat tapping a nervous rhythm against your ribs. The sound happens again, a hollow thunk, like wood complaining about something it's frankly tired of tolerating. When you reach the bow, you see the problem. Part of the hull's outer plank has begun to split along a knotline. It's not catastrophic, not yet, but the Vikings treat it like a ticking clock strapped to the side of the ship. Out here, a crack isn't a crack. It's a threat, a promise. Water has opinions, and it loves exploiting weaknesses. A burly man kneels beside the split, running his fingers along the grain of the wood. His expression stays eerily calm, but you see the seriousness beneath it. He taps gently, listening to the sound. "Not deep," he says, glancing at the others, "but fix now, before sea makes it bigger." And there it is, the Viking rule of the ocean. Small problems become big ones fast. Big ones don't give second chances. You watch as they begin assembling tools from a leather-wrapped bundle, mallets, chisels, wooden wedges, rolls of tarred wool. Even a small iron pot containing leftover pine tar. You blink. You'd assumed repairs happened in sheltered harbors. Not in the middle of a restless sea. But apparently Vikings were the medieval equivalent of those people who can fix a car with duct tape and spite. A sailor hands you a small wooden bucket. Inside is cold seawater. Hold, he instructs. You nod, even though you have no idea what part of the operation this bucket will play. But holding things feels safely beginner-friendly. One of the younger craftsmen leans over the damaged plank and starts scraping away loose fibers with a bone tool. His movements are precise, practiced, and strangely gentle, as if the ship were a living creature that needs tending rather than an object. You crouch beside him, noticing how the wood beneath the scrape is pale, fresh, exposed, vulnerable. Ship is home, he murmurs without looking up. We care for home. You nod, moved by the simplicity of it. Another sailor dunked a bundle of wool into your bucket of seawater. You blink in surprise. Finally your bucket has a purpose. He pulls it out and presses it into the crack, using the wet fibers to clean out grit and soften the space before sealing. Water drips down the hull and splashes your boots. Next comes the pine tar. Thick, sticky, dark as midnight. It smells sharp, like smoke, sap, and the forest itself. The Vikings warm the tar in that tiny iron pot using a handful of still glowing coals sheltered from last night's fire. You're amazed the coals survived the storm. But when you mention this, a rower chuckles. We save fire always. He explains. Fire is life. The tar begins to bubble slightly, turning smoother, more spreadable. One Viking dips a carved wooden spatula into it, lifts it, watches the viscous strand drip and stretch. Ready, he announces. The repair team moves fast now. One man presses dried moss along the inside ridge of the crack. Acting as a natural sealant, lightweight but surprisingly effective. Another pushes softened pitch-soaked wool into the gap. A third hammers in small wooden wedges, tapping them with sure, steady blows until the crack presses tight. Finally, the tar man steps forward. He spreads the dark liquid across the wound, coating it thoroughly. The ship hisses softly as the warm tar touches the cool hull. It clings, fills, seals, an ancient, resin-scented bandage. You watch, fascinated. Not a single drop is wasted. Not a movement is unnecessary. You'd heard before that Viking shipbuilding was advanced for its time. But seeing them repair the ship mid-journey feels like witnessing a lost art. Historians still debate the exact combination of materials used for quick seaworthy repairs. But watching the crew now, you understand. The recipe was simple: skill, instinct, and whatever the ocean hadn't stolen yet. A breeze brushes your face as the tar begins to harden. The Vikings step back to inspect their work. One taps the repaired plank with the back of his knuckles. The sound rings solid, confident. Satisfied murmurs ripple through the group. Good, the craftsman says. She's strong again. You exhale without realizing you'd been holding your breath. But the repairs aren't done. Another Viking approaches with a small bucket of tallow-thinned tar and starts brushing it along nearby seams. We check all, he explains. Storm push hard last night. You follow his gaze along the rails and edges. Scuff marks, scratches, water stains. The storm wasn't just loud, it had teeth. Two rowers begin tightening the oarlocks, reinforcing them with new leather strips. Another pair coils ropes that had loosened during the storm. Someone else inspects the mast, a tall, steadfast pillar that somehow held strong through the chaos. It's all part of the rhythm: assess, repair, reinforce. You find yourself helping almost automatically, handing tools, holding beams steady, wiping off excess tar. The Vikings don't treat you like an outsider now. More like an apprentice who needs gentle guidance but is fully welcome at the workbench. At one point, a sailor hands you a wad of pitch-soaked wool. "Push here," he says, pointing to a narrow seam. You press it in carefully. He gives a satisfied grunt. Approval achieved. Another Viking squints at you. Then jokes. "You do good. Maybe we keep you." You raise an eyebrow. "As what?" He shrugs. "Spare part." Laughter erupts around you. You sigh. Comedy at sea is very democratic. Everyone is fair game. When the repairs finish, the crew takes a collective breath. The ship feels steadier beneath your feet, more solid, more whole. The sun finally breaks through the thinning clouds, casting a soft path of gold across the water. The light reflects off the tar patches, turning them glossy and black. A rower leans against the rail, staring out at the horizon. "Storms make ships stronger," he says quietly. "Make us stronger too." You let the words settle into you. They feel true. Not just in the poetic way, but in the practical, bone-deep way Vikings seem to understand everything. You think back to the crack in the hull, small, almost invisible at first, but dangerous if left ignored. The repair wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't require heroics. Just attention, patience, steady hands. Maybe that's the real secret of Viking resilience. Not the strength to break the ocean, but the discipline to mend what the ocean bends. The wind shifts again, gentle this time. The longship creaks, its voice clearer, healthier. The crew nods to one another. Crisis handled. Journey continues. And with the repaired hull firm beneath your feet, you feel something unexpected. Safer. Steadier. Almost part of the ship yourself. The sea stretches ahead, wide and waiting. And the Vikings, ever practical, are already preparing for whatever comes next. The longship glides forward again, its freshly repaired hull humming with renewed strength. The storm is behind you now, and the morning sun stretches across the surface of the sea like a spilled sheet of molten gold. The Vikings move about with a quiet satisfaction. Storm survived. Ship mended. Spirits steady. But there's a new energy rising among them. Something subtle yet unmistakable. A faint gray line appears on the horizon. Land. Not home, no. This land is unfamiliar, distant, and cautious looking, the way a stranger stands on the edge of a conversation. But it is land nonetheless. And for a crew that's been fighting waves and wind for days. That simple silhouette is enough to shift the entire atmosphere aboard the ship. The Vikings straighten, shoulders square, eyes sharpen. You feel it too, a ripple of anticipation. Your body may be aching from storms and rowing, but the sight of something solid in the distance sparks a surprising surge of hope. A bearded sailor nudges you lightly with his elbow and points. "Sure," he says, as though the word itself is a blessing. Another murmurs something about good trading winds. A third checks the ropes with renewed vigor. This is not a raid. Not a conquest. Not a battle. Today is a trading day. You hadn't expected that. Vikings raiding? That's the stereotype everyone knows. But Vikings trading? Negotiating for goods with big calloused hands and gently suspicious eyes? That's the part the history books tend to whisper about rather than shout. Yet as you watch them prepare, it becomes obvious. This is a crew that deals in far more than swords and fire. One sailor opens a wooden chest you haven't seen before, a well-sealed, iron-bound container that has stayed closed through storms, rowing shifts, and late-night stories. Inside lies an assortment of carefully wrapped items, carved bone cones, delicate glass beads traded from faraway lands, iron tools, small pouches of fine furs, even a finely crafted brooch with intricate knotwork glinting in the sunlight. You look up at the man curating the chest. He handles each piece with surprising tenderness. Trade goods, he explains. People buy. Good profit. The pride in his voice is unmistakable. Another sailor approaches with a small wooden box filled with amber, golden, honey-like chunks of hardened resin that glow beautifully when held to the light. You gasp at the sight. Amber like this fetches high value among coastal communities and inland settlements alike. The Vikings know it. That's why they guard these pieces almost as fiercely as their weapons. Found on shores, a Viking tells you, running a thumb over a polished bead. Sea give us treasure. You wonder how often that phrase comes up in their worldview. The sea gives. You've mostly seen the sea take. As the longship approaches land, preparations intensify. The men organize goods into accessible bundles. Some untie their hair and rebraid it neatly. A few tighten their belts, adjust their cloaks, or check their boots. The sudden burst of grooming surprises you until you realize presentation matters. Even in the medieval world of raw survival, looking respectable during trade is essential. You catch one Viking checking his reflection in his polished shield. Another runs a hand through his beard to fluff it into something more dignified. A third uses a bone comb to remove salt clumps from his hair. You nearly laugh. These are the same men who joked about getting soaked during a storm, yet here they are, primping like they're about to attend a rustic business convention. The island ahead grows clearer, rocky cliffs, patches of green, a sheltered cove, smoke curls from small huts along the shoreline. You feel a sense of wonder stirring. This is what the Vikings truly did most of the time: connect distant worlds, move goods, build relationships, build wealth. As the ship draws closer, voices rise from the shore, shouts, greetings, cautious calls. You can't understand the words, but the tone carries across the water. Curious, guarded, not hostile, yet. A Viking beside you taps your arm. We show open hands first, he says, holding his palms forward. Trade, not trouble. When the longship eases into the cove, several locals approach, men with sun-darkened skin, simple tunics, and expressions that flicker between curiosity and suspicion. The Vikings lift their empty palms in greeting. The locals hesitate, then respond with nods, a good sign. The longship slides onto the sand with a soft crunch. The crew leaps off with practiced ease. You follow, nearly slipping on wet pebbles before a Viking steadies you with one hand. Laughing quietly, land legs slow, he teases. The trading begins not with shouting or bargaining, but with gentle displays. A Viking holds up a carved bone comb. A local man examines it, brushing its smooth prongs with his fingers. Another Viking sets out a small pile of amber pieces. A woman from the settlement picks one up, marveling at the way the sunlight filters through it. Soon there are quiet exchanges, goods offered, goods received. The Vikings trade for dried fish, grain, pottery, warm woolen cloth, and even livestock. You watch them negotiate in a mix of gestures, broken phrases, and shared human instinct. It's surprisingly smooth, almost elegant. One Viking offers a beautifully forged iron knife, the blade thin, sharp, and balanced. In exchange, a local elder presents a jar of honey, thick and golden. The two men nod respectfully. Trade complete. Nearby, a group of children watches the entire process with wide eyes. One points at the longship's dragon head, whispering excitedly. Another cautiously touches the fringe of a Viking cloak. A rower crouches down and hands them a polished pebble bead. The children gasp, delighted. The rower winks at you. "Good for business," he says. You notice something else too. The Vikings are not demanding. They are not intimidating. They don't flash weapons or shout. They carry themselves with confidence but also careful restraint. They've learned from experience. Trade lasts longer than fear. One man explains to you quietly. Trade keeps peace. Peace keeps roots open. A simple truth that holds the weight of survival. Some historians still debate how often Vikings traded peacefully versus raided aggressively. Standing here, watching the warm exchange of goods and the gentle tone of communication, you sense the answer isn't simple. These men can be warriors. But right now, they are merchants, diplomats, wanderers seeking opportunity rather than conquest. A soft breeze drifts through the cove. Smoke swirls gently above the settlement. The Vikings continue their exchanges. Laughter mixing with foreign words. Hands passing goods with care. And as you stand among them, cold, tired, but steady, you feel something shift inside you. This is the side of the Viking world few talk about. Not violence, not plunder, but connection, commerce, mutual survival. A longshore conversation with strangers across a sea. By the time the sun rises high and the longship's deck fills with new supplies, you've begun to understand the truth. Vikings didn't just cross oceans to take. They crossed them to build bridges, one trade, one handshake, one wary smile at a time. And today, you walked that bridge with them. The trading winds settle into a warm, lazy calm as the sun drifts toward its highest point. The Vikings finish loading the last bundles of grain, smoked fish, and cloth onto the longship. The locals wave them off with a curious mixture of affection and relief. Affection for the goods exchanged. Relief that the dragon-headed ship didn't arrive with darker intentions. You step back onto the vessel with sand on your boots and a strange sense of gratitude humming in your chest. But as the longship pulls away from the shore, the mood among the crew changes again. Trading might keep the coins flowing, but the Vikings are still Vikings. This is a world built on opportunity. And sometimes opportunity means something sharper, faster, and more dangerous than negotiation. You notice the subtle shift, shields being checked, weapons inspected, glances passed between rowers that carry unspoken meaning. This journey wasn't only about trading. It was also a raid. Not a grand assault. Not a legendary saga that bards will one day shout across smoky halls, but a small, precise, almost surgical operation. Quick, quiet, in and out before anyone can gather their courage or their guards. The captain walks along the deck, his expression unreadable, his steps steady. He doesn't bark orders, he doesn't need to. Each man knows the plan. You feel the tension building like a drawn bowstring. A rower leans toward you. Small place, he says softly. Not big raid. Quick, fast hands. You swallow. Fast hands? That phrase can mean many things. You get the impression it doesn't involve gentle pickpocketing. The longship turns, veering along the coastline until a tiny, unguarded settlement comes into view, a scattering of huts, livestock pens, and a small wooden granary perched on a hill. There's no fortification, no stone walls, no watchtower, only smoke from a cooking fire curling innocently into the sky. The Vikings move with a kind of quiet efficiency that almost surprises you. This is not chaos. It's choreography, again, only this time, the steps are sharper. A Viking offers you a cloak to wrap around your bright clothing. Hide, he says. Stay with ship. You nod. Raiding is not your profession. You barely survived rowing. The longship slides into a narrow cove hidden between cliffs. You can still see the settlement. But from here, the ship is invisible to those on shore. The Vikings step onto the sand with silent discipline, no shouting. No boasting, no banging of shields. Their movements are practiced, deliberate, almost calm. This is not bravado. This is survival. A half-dozen men head up the slope toward the huts, slipping between boulders and tall grasses. You watch them move like shadows, low, focused, quiet. A few carry axes, others short swords, but most have nothing more than sticks or ropes. It becomes clear quickly. This isn't a plunder for blood raid. It's a targeted grab. A resource raid. One Viking had whispered earlier. Wool, grain, maybe a sheep or two, necessities to keep the long voyage going. Not war, not conquest, just the grim practicality of life on the sea. Still, tension tingles in your skin. Even small raids have sharp edges. Minutes pass. The crew left on deck waits in silence. No one jokes. No one hums. Even the ocean seems to hold its breath. Then, faintly, carried by the wind, you hear shouting. Not the violent screams of battle, but startled, confused shouts, the sound of doors opening, someone yelling in a panic, a dog barking ferociously, something clattering to the ground. You grip the railing instinctively. A Viking beside you places a hand on your shoulder, not to comfort you, but to anchor you. His eyes remain fixed on the hill, calm and calculating. A moment later, a figure appears at the ridge, a broad-shouldered rower waving an arm in the air. Behind him come two others, carrying heavy sacks slung over their backs. No blood on their clothes. No limp in their steps. They're practically jogging, efficiency embodied. But then you see them, 3 villagers following, shouting and waving sticks. One throws a stone that lands harmlessly in the sand far from the Vikings. Another raises a crude spear but doesn't get close enough to use it. The Vikings don't turn to fight. They don't even slow down. One of them simply bangs the flat of his axe against his shield, once, hard enough to echo. The villagers freeze, just for a heartbeat, but that pause is enough. The crew is already boarding. One man tosses a bundle of wool into the ship. Another jumps down with a bag of barley. A third carries a squirming goat under one arm. The goat bleats indignantly, its legs flailing in what can only be described as medieval protest. A Viking grins at you. "Lunch," he says. The villagers reach the edge of the beach but stop short of the waterline. Their expressions are a mix of fear, anger, and frustrated helplessness. They are farmers, not fighters. A Viking near you mutters, "No need for blades today." Another adds, "Good, peace better, but food needed." You realize the truth behind these small raids. They weren't driven by bloodlust. They were driven by necessity. When you're crossing oceans in a wooden ship with 30 hungry men, the world doesn't give you many options. Trade works when people are willing. When they aren't, the Vikings take just enough to survive, then flee before conflict escalates. Some historians still debate whether these small raids were planned or opportunistic. Watching it happen, you sense the answer clearly. Vikings were pragmatists. If a settlement resisted fiercely, they would leave. If it didn't, they took what they needed and moved on. The longship pushes off from shore as the villagers shout curses that fade quickly with distance. No one aboard the ship looks guilty. No one looks proud. This is simply another day in the life of medieval sailors who live closer to the edge than comfort allows. You watch the coastline shrink. The tiny settlement becomes a blur. The villagers become dots. Soon, the cove disappears entirely. The captain gives a single nod, subtle, approving. You exhale a breath you didn't realize you were holding. The Vikings settle back into their spots, checking the new supplies, tying down the goat, which continues protesting loudly, and preparing to row again. One of the younger rowers sits beside you, handing you a small cloth pouch. Inside are a few grains that escaped the sack. "For luck," he says with a smile. You look at the pouch, then at him. "Is it really luck?" He shrugs. "Sometimes luck, sometimes hunger. Both important." The ship adjusts its course, the sail catching a gentler wind now. The world feels wider again, the horizon stretching open like a new chapter. And you understand, more deeply than before, that the Vikings lived in a constant balancing act between trade and taking, peace and pressure, opportunity and survival. Nothing was simple. Nothing was black and white. Just shades of necessity drifting across an endless, unpredictable sea. And with that realization, the longship sails onward. By the time the longship has fully left the coastline behind, the sun has dipped low enough to melt the sky into streaks of orange, rose, and tired gold. The goat, still tied securely near the mast, has finally stopped bleating, settling into a resentful silence that several Vikings find deeply amusing. The sacks of grain and wool are tucked safely beneath tarred cloth. The mood on the ship eases, softens, exhales. But exhaustion sits in the bones of every man aboard. Not from raiding, not from rowing, from something far more difficult. Staying awake on a moving longship made of wet wood, cold air, and zero privacy. It's time for rest. You're still standing halfway toward the bow when a Viking gestures for you to follow. Sleep soon, he says, hard on sea, but you learn. You nod, though with some hesitation. You've watched these men nap on shifting planks and swaying benches. You've witnessed them sleep through storms that would keep you awake until retirement. You are not convinced you can do what they do. But you try. The night settles quickly, swallowing the sky in a deep blue blanket. Stars appear one by one, soft, shimmering anchors in the vastness overhead. The wind calms to a distant, intermittent sigh. The longship glides in a gentle rhythm, rocking not violently as during the storm, but like a cradle too old to fully trust yet too steady to fear. You kneel beside one of the sleeping areas, the bedroom. If you can call it that. It's a section on the floor between two rows of shields. A rolled wool cloak, a second cloak for warmth, a patch of planks that look planks-ish. A Viking flips his cloak open and gestures. Here, he says, this place good, dry enough. You look at the boards. They do not appear dry. They appear exactly like the kind of surface where splinters are born and thrive. But the Vikings settle around you, stretching out without hesitation. You decide to imitate them, lowering yourself carefully until your shoulder touches the wood. It's hard, cold, uneven. Your hip immediately finds the one knot in the planks with aggressive personality. A Viking to your left notices the expression flashing across your face and stifles a laugh. First night always worst, he says. Second night too. Third maybe better. Maybe. Comforting. As the crew settles, the darkness grows thicker. A few men lean against barrels, their cloaks pulled up to their chins. Others lie curled like cats, tucked into themselves for warmth. You notice how they sleep clustered in groups, not touching, but close enough that shared warmth and presence create an invisible barrier against the cold. Someone hands you a small bundle. Inside is a fur strip. Head rest, he says. You thank him quietly. The motion feels intimate, humanizing. One small mercy in a world where comfort costs more than gold. The ocean hums beneath you, low. Constant vibration that travels up your spine. It's almost soothing until the ship tilts slightly and your body threatens to roll sideways. You instinctively grab a rope. The Viking nearest you catches your eye and nudges a wooden beam beside you. Hold here when move, he says. Sleep better when not sliding into ocean. You decide that is excellent advice. Voices begin to fade. Cloaks rustle. Someone yawns a yawn that sounds like it came from the bottom of the world. And then, softly, almost imperceptibly, the ship's gentle swaying becomes a rhythm your body starts adjusting to. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel comfortable, but it begins to feel survivable. You close your eyes. A moment later, or what feels like a moment later, a wave slaps the hull. Hard. Your eyes fly open. Half the Vikings don't move. The other half shift positions like they're adjusting pillows. You stare at them, incredulous. Do these people have shock absorbers instead of nerves? A rower cracks one eye open. Ocean tests you, he mutters, then falls instantly back asleep. You can't tell if that's wisdom or exhaustion. You try again, eyes closed, breath steady. The wood under you vibrates from the motion of the sea. The air tastes faintly of salt and tar. Someone near you snores softly, rhythmic. surprisingly gentle, like a bear trying to hum. For a brief moment, you think you're actually drifting off. Another sudden jolt snaps you awake as the ship climbs a taller wave and slams back down. Your teeth click together. You groan into your cloak. The Viking on your right pats your arm without opening his eyes. You get used to it, he says softly, or you don't. Either way, you sleep. That's an unexpectedly philosophical take. The longship rocks again, but this time your body anticipates the motion. You shift slightly, adjusting your balance just like the Vikings do. One leg straightens, one knee bends, your shoulder rolls into a more stable angle. Not ideal, but workable. Your breathing slows. You notice the small details around you now. The sound of rope creaking. The faint shuffle of a sleeping man repositioning. The rhythmic lap of waves. The whisper of wind through the sailcloth. These sounds become a kind of lullaby. Not a soft, melodic one, no, but a practical, steady one, a reminder that the ship is alive, that it is carrying you forward, that you are part of its movement now. Your thoughts drift. And in that drifting, you start to understand. Vikings didn't just sleep wherever they could. They slept with the ship. In rhythm with it. Trusting it. Letting it hold them the way the sea holds the hull. Some historians still debate how much actual rest Viking crews managed on long voyages. Seeing it firsthand, you suspect the answer is complicated. They don't sleep deeply. They don't sleep long. They sleep efficiently. Like soldiers. Like wanderers. Like people who know that tomorrow will demand more than today. You finally slip into a soft, uneasy sleep. And then, you're awakened again by a hand gently shaking your shoulder. You blink into the dimness. A Viking crouches over you. Your turn, he whispers. Everyone watches sometimes. Safe for all. You push yourself upright. Your body is stiff, but something inside you feels steadier now. Anchored, connected to the ship's motion. You stand, cloak pulled tight, and walk to the rail where the water glimmers with moonlight. Night air brushes your face. The longship hums beneath your feet. The Vikings breathe around you in a shared, quiet rhythm. And you, despite the cold, the exhaustion, the restless sea, feel calm. You can do this. You are doing this. For the first time, you sleep like a Viking? And wake like one too. The moon is fading when it happens. Slowly sliding down the sky like someone gently dimming the world. First blue, then gray, then that early morning silver that makes the entire ocean look like a quiet, breathing creature. The ship sways softly, the oars creak in their bindings, and your fellow Viking sleepers begin to stir, stretching and yawning like a row of oversized house cats. And then you hear it. A voice, low at first, humming more than singing, a soft, measured melody floating out from near the center of the ship. It drifts across the deck like warm breath on cold air. Another voice joins in, then another. Soon the entire longship seems to pulse with the sound, a hush of harmony. Deep and resonant. Older than the dawn rising around you. Viking songs. Not the thunderous war chants movies love to dramatize. But the quieter ones, the ones meant for mornings at sea. For weariness shared between men. For reminding themselves who they are and why they keep rowing into the unknown. You sit up slowly, pulling your cloak tighter. letting the rhythm settle in your chest. One of the rowers gives you a sleepy smile. Morning song, he says, voice still rough. Good for spirit. You listen more closely. The melody is simple, but its simplicity is what makes it beautiful. A few men hum a steady drone. Others weave in above it with murmured lines of Old Norse. Even though you don't understand the words, you feel their meaning, gratitude for waking alive, hope for calm seas, a gentle plea for protection from whatever the day might bring. A drummer lifts a hand drum, not the heavy war kind, but a small, circular frame drum. He taps it lightly with his fingers. Dum, 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 dum. A heartbeat, a reminder that the crew moves as one rhythmic body. Another man lifts a small wooden flute, carved, worn smooth by years of use. He plays a thin, breathy tone over the humming voices, filling the morning with something soft and almost sacred. You didn't expect Vikings to create something this tender, but you're starting to learn they have 1,000 sides the world rarely sees. A young sailor sits beside you, eyes half closed, humming along without opening his mouth fully. Songs help us work, he explains in a low murmur. Help us not think about pain. He stretches his arms and winces slightly. Rowing is heavy, he adds with a crooked grin. You nod. Heavy is an understatement. The song shifts, voices rising for a moment, then dropping into a softer refrain. A few Vikings thump their hands against their chests or knees, adding a percussive counter-rhythm. The sound is not polished, not perfect, but it's grounded, real, human. There's a sense that this song has been sung many times before. That fathers taught it to sons. That it traveled from fjords to ships to battlefields to weddings to lonely outposts in foreign lands. It's not just music, it's memory. One rower leans toward you and whispers, "Song older than our ship." Another adds, "Older than my grandfather's grandfather." A third grins, "But I sing better." They all laugh quietly. And in that laughter, you feel warmth, real warmth, like the ship's heartbeat gets brighter for a moment. After the song fades, the drummer shifts into a new rhythm, steady, upbeat, meant for rowing. The beat matches the natural pace of hands returning to oars. It's not commanding, it's guiding. The longship begins to move again, slicing through the morning water with renewed purpose. You join the rowers again, not because you're good at it, you're not, but because the rhythm pulls you toward participation. The oar sits heavy in your hands, but the song lingers in your bones, giving you a steady pattern to follow. Push, pull, push, pull. Your movements sync with theirs. The burn in your muscles feels less intrusive. The cold in your fingers feels less sharp. The ache in your back becomes background noise rather than a foreground emergency. Sing, someone says beside you. You blink. Me? A few men nod enthusiastically. Yes, sing anything. What if I'm bad? A Viking shrugs. We all bad sometimes. Another rower adds, bad singing still singing. You hesitate, then hum a single note, quiet, shaky, unsure. The Vikings around you grin like you've just handed them a gift. One harmonizes softly beneath your pitch. Another adds a higher line. Soon, your small, uncertain hum becomes part of a bigger whole, a thread in their tapestry. And it feels good. A sailor behind you starts a lighter song. Not a sacred morning chant this time, but something playful, like a work shanty. The rhythm is faster, the tone mischievous. A few men laugh between lines. Someone elbows the drummer when he rushes the beat. Another rower adds an improvised verse that makes half the ship roar with laughter. You ask him what he said. He smirks. Joke about goats. You decide you don't need the translation. The songs roll on, shifting with mood and weather. Slow songs for steady rowing. Faster ones to keep spirits rising. A quiet one whispered by a few men when the ocean grows still. Music is oxygen aboard this ship. A reminder that they're human. Not just workers or warriors or wandering shadows on the sea. Some historians still debate whether Viking rowers used music regularly to maintain rowing rhythm, or whether that idea comes mostly from later stories. But here, in this moment, surrounded by humming voices and swaying bodies, you feel certain they must have. Not because it was efficient, but because it kept them alive inside. You lean back slightly, letting your muscles shift into the rhythm. The longship feels almost alive beneath you, its wooden bones bending with each stroke. Its tarred skin humming as the oars drive it forward. Sing again, a Viking encourages gently. You do. And this time, you're not shy. Your voice blends with theirs under the pale morning sky. Your oar rises and falls with theirs. Your heartbeat matches the drum. And though the sea stretches endlessly ahead, the songs make the distance feel smaller, the work feel lighter, and the world, just for a moment, feel kind. The morning songs fade into a gentle hum as the longship settles into a calm stretch of open water. The rowers relax their shoulders, letting the oars rest across their knees for a moment. The drummer sets his instrument aside, wiping a bit of moisture from the hide with his sleeve. It almost feels peaceful, too peaceful. Honestly, the kind of peace that makes you suspicious because you've learned by now that the medieval ocean doesn't hand out relaxation for free. And right on cue, a Viking near the mast lifts a coil of rope, frowns at it, and mutters something that you don't understand but instinctively translate as, "Well, that's going to snap soon." It turns out this is a crafting day, one of the quiet, industrious intervals where the Vikings repair and create the tools they'll need for the next leg of the journey. You expected warriors to spend their downtime sharpening axes or bragging about battles. But instead, the longship soon transforms into a floating workshop. A rower waves you over. "Help?" he asks, already placing a small bundle of things at your feet. You recognize almost none of it: strips of leather, a few iron rivets, a bone-handled awl, pieces of driftwood, and something that looks like it used to be a spoon but is now in the process of becoming something else entirely. You crouch beside him as he threads a thick leather strip through a partly broken oar collar. His movements are smooth and confident, fingers working faster than yours could even think. "Rowing all day breaks much," he explains. "We fix before ocean gets angry." You nod. You've begun to suspect the ocean is always slightly angry. Nearby, two men are busy reshaping a bent spearhead. One holds the iron piece with thick gloves while another taps it into shape with a small hammer they heat over a tiny brazier. The iron hisses faintly, softening just enough to mold without cracking. You watch, mesmerized. The precision surprises you. Each tap deliberate. Each pause calculated. Vikings weren't blacksmiths on board, but they were absolutely capable field repairers. A younger sailor jogs past carrying an armful of wooden staves, dropping them in a neat pile next to a barrel missing a few slats. 3 others immediately begin reassembling it, tapping each stave into alignment. They seal the seams carefully with tar-soaked wool. The smell of hot pitch rises again, filling the air with that spicy, resinous sweetness that now feels like the scent of Viking life itself. One of the tar handlers approaches you and gestures toward a bucket of resin. "Stir," he says. You take the wooden paddle and begin mixing the thick, sticky substance. It's denser than you expect, like stirring warm tree sap mixed with stubborn glue. He watches your struggle for a second, grins, and shows you the proper circular motion, small, patient rotations that blend evenly without cooling too fast. "Good," he says as you imitate him. "Not too fast." Tar likes calm. You never thought you'd be complimented on your tar stirring technique. But here we are. Across the deck, a veteran Viking works on sharpening his seeks, the small, broad knife every man carries. The blade glints under the sunlight as he slides it against a rough stone in long, steady motions. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound is rhythmic, oddly soothing. He glances at you and lifts the blade slightly. "Sharp is safe," he says. "Dull cuts worse." A few men are carving wooden pegs from spare bits of driftwood. Their knives dance in quick, elegant arcs, shaving away thin curls of wood. The curls drift across the deck like pale ribbons. You pick one up, light, delicate, beautiful. The Viking crafting the peg notices and nods approvingly. "For repair," he explains. "Ship always hungry for new pegs." Nearby, someone repairs a shield that took a beating during either the storm or the last raid. The outer rim is cracked. The leather edging needs replacing. The Viking working on it checks the wood grain the way a jeweler might inspect gemstone cracks, careful, precise, intimately familiar. He nods to himself, then begins applying a mixture of tar and powdered charcoal to reinforce the damage. "Shield must live longer," he says. Another Viking sits cross-legged, meticulously braiding a rope. The pattern is surprisingly intricate, alternating thickness that gives it extra strength. When you comment on it, he shrugs casually. "My mother taught," he says. "She better than me." He grins. "Much better." That line sticks with you. These men learned skills from families, from childhoods on farms and fjords, from lives lived before the sea became their road. You're witnessing fragments of those lives woven into their tools. Some of the men engage in tasks that seem almost artistic. One is carving a small wooden charm, shaped loosely like a fish, while humming quietly. Another polishes an amber bead into a smooth oval, flipping it between his fingers as if testing its soul. A third is engraving a pattern onto the handle of an axe. You ask why. He shrugs. "Feels good," he says. "Working hands makes thinking calm." A Viking behind you laughs as he straightens bent nails. "Storm made these drunk," he jokes. "We sober them up." But not all repairs are quiet. At one point, you hear a loud crack. A rower holds up a broken oar pin with a sheepish grin. Another man shouts something teasing, judging from the tone. Probably, "Stop rowing like a bear." The rower fires back with a comment that makes 3 men burst into laughter. You catch maybe one word, your mother. Viking humor is extensive. Still, the broken pin is no joke. They move quickly, choosing a suitable piece of wood, carving it down, sanding it with rough stone, checking the fit, adjusting it again, sealing it with tar. Within half an hour, the oar pin looks brand new. One of the oldest Vikings, gray streaks in his beard, arms scarred from years of sailing, sits in the corner mending a wool tunic. You watch him push a bone needle through thick fabric with surprising delicacy. He notices your stare. "Wind cold," he says with a shrug. "Better fix now before next storm steals warmth." Then he adds with a wink, "Needles not only for women." You grin. Some historians still debate how common it was for Vikings to craft and repair tools on board long voyages. Watching this floating workshop, you're convinced it was essential. Without constant work, the longship itself would decay mid-sea. Nothing waits. Nothing lasts without tending. A large Viking lifts a bucket and dumps seawater across the planks, cleaning away shavings and tar drops. Another uses a reed broom to sweep the deck. You help, pushing clusters of dust and wood curls toward the center. A rower at your side comments, "Good worker. Maybe we keep you." That's the second time someone has said that. You're unsure if you should be honored or nervous. By midday, the ship looks different, tidy, repaired, reinforced, tools now sharpened, ropes braided, shields patched, barrels sealed. The goat bleats twice as if critiquing the craftsmanship. And a Viking responds with a deadpan, "Make your own tools then," which earns several laughs. As the sun climbs higher, the air warms just slightly, creating a comfortable hum across the deck. The men sit back, admiring their work with quiet pride. One offers you a wooden cup of water. You take it, grateful. A final Viking claps your shoulder. "Tools ready," he says. "Good. Ocean always hungry. We must be ready." You look across the deck, across the hand-sanded wood, the rebraided ropes, the polished blades, the patched shields. Here, in the gentle lull between adventures, you've seen another side of Viking life. Not the warrior, not the explorer, but the craftsman, the maker, the fixer. A world of hands working tirelessly to keep life afloat on a sea that never forgives unpreparedness. And as the longship glides forward once more, you understand something deeper. Survival wasn't luck. It was craftsmanship. Every tool, every knot, every seam, each one a quiet promise against the chaos of the ocean. And today, you help weave that promise into the ship. The afternoon drifts into a soft haze, the kind that melts the horizon into the sky until everything looks like a watercolor brushstroke. The longship rocks gently, warmed by a rare stretch of calm sunlight. After the busy chaos of repairs and crafting, the crew settles into a quiet rhythm, one that feels strangely contemplative. You notice it first in the way the Vikings lean against the railing. Their eyes aren't scanning for threats or waves or distant smoke. They're looking up, toward the clouds drifting lazily above you. A rower beside you nudges your elbow and points at the sky. "See," he says, "clouds talk today." You follow his finger. The clouds are long, thin streaks brushing across the blue, angled slightly toward the northeast. To you they look like nothing more than peaceful decoration. To the Vikings, though, the sky is a library. And they are lifelong readers. What do they say, you ask? He squints, scratches his beard, and finally shrugs. Good wind, maybe. Or bad wind, maybe. You laugh, and he grins back. Clouds always tricky, he adds. Ocean likes surprises. A second Viking joins the conversation, pointing at a cluster of small, puffy clouds gathering along the horizon. Wind from south, he murmurs. Warm air, could mean calm night. Then another rower shakes his head. Or big wind tomorrow. Depends on how they move. And there it is, the ancient truth, whispered casually over the waves. Some historians still debate how accurate Viking weather lore really was. But watching the crew now, it's clear they had an intimate relationship with the sky. Maybe not perfect, but attentive enough to keep them alive. You tilt your head back to study the patterns more carefully. Wisps shaped like fish bones. Long feathers of white. A hazy curtain in the distance that might be sea mist or rain waiting to happen. It's beautiful in a calm, indifferent way. Like the weather knows it can ruin your week and just doesn't feel like it today. A Viking taps the wooden rail, listening to the tone. You hear that? He asks. You nod even though you don't. He chuckles. Ship tells weather too. Planks tighter when storm close. Looser when dry. You place your palm against the wood. It's warm from the sun. The grain slightly raised. Does it feel different? You honestly can't tell. But the Viking nods approvingly as if you passed a test. You'll take the win. Another sailor lifts a wet finger to the wind. An old-fashioned forecast move that somehow feels dramatic under this glowing sky. Wind changing, he mutters. Northwest soon. How do you know? You ask. He shrugs. Wind says so. You wait for clarification. None arrives. Meanwhile, at the stern, two men are throwing small pieces of driftwood into the sea. You watch the wood bob, drift, and sway. Testing currents. A Viking explains. Wood moves fast, current strong. Wood stays, current lazy. You nod, charmed by the simplicity of it. No compasses, no sensors, just driftwood, nature for the win. Another Viking sits cross-legged on a coil of rope, staring intensely at the waves. Not the big waves, the tiny ones, the soft ripples that shiver across the surface like whispers. Small waves mean something? You ask. He nods without turning his head. They show wind before wind comes. How? They just do. That's surprisingly unhelpful and somehow still profound. The ocean itself joins the lesson. A low murmur rolls beneath the ship, a deep, slow swell coming from the west. It's not threatening, just persistent, like the ocean tapping its fingers on the table. Hear that? A Viking says. Swell from storm far away. You frown, but the sky is clear. Yes, he says, storm there. He points somewhere behind the horizon. Ocean remembers longer than clouds do. You pause, feeling the truth of that settle into your chest. The sea is memory, long, patient memory. A gull passes overhead, screeching once before banking southward. Several Vikings glance at each other. Birds flying low, someone says, means rain. Or maybe the gull was just in a mood. Hard to know. One of the older Vikings adjusts a rope near the mast and clears his throat. When clouds like this, he gestures at the sky. We prepare for three things. You lean in. He holds up fingers one by one. Rain, wind, or nothing. You blink. That's everything. He grins. Yes, weather always everything. Another sailor adds, deadpan, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. You laugh. You've heard modern fishermen say the same thing. Seems weather humor is timeless. The men settle down in various spots, sipping thin ale or chewing on small pieces of dried fish as they keep scanning the horizon. You sit beside them, letting your gaze drift over clouds you would have ignored back home. You try to interpret their shapes like the Vikings do. One looks like a dragon's tooth, another like a half-eaten biscuit, a third like a stretched wool blanket. You're not making weather predictions, but you're learning to see the sky with more patience. A Viking notices your focus and nods approvingly. Good. Eyes learn slow, but they learn. You guys can really read everything up there? You ask. He shrugs again, such a Viking gesture at this point. Not everything, but enough. Enough to survive, enough to know when to row harder, enough to sense when the sea is about to misbehave. The ship rocks gently, lulled by waves that seem almost affectionate. The wind lifts strands of your hair and carries the scent of salt, pine tar, and wool. The sky overhead shifts once more, its thin streaks thickening just slightly as a distant haze builds. The Vikings notice. They always notice. A rower tightens his cloak. Another adjusts a loose rope. Someone else glances at the goat, who seems to sense weather changes with unsettling accuracy. The animal is suddenly restless, stamping its foot and snorting. Rain later, a Viking predicts. Wind before that, another adds. But not bad wind, a third says. Maybe good for sailing. The captain steps to the center of the deck, gazing calmly at the horizon. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. Everyone already knows what to do. Weather is not an enemy to be feared. It is a language to be learned. And today, you learned your first words. As the longship continues across the shimmering sea, you tilt your head to the sky again. No longer just looking, but seeing. The afternoon drifts into one of those rare ocean lulls, no storms brewing. No coastline in sight, no urgent repairs, no shouting, no rowing frenzy. Just the longship breathing steadily beneath you, rocking in a patient, almost affectionate rhythm. The sky is a soft, pale wash. The waves are small, gentle, whispering their way along the hull. And for the first time in what feels like ages, the Vikings look relaxed. Not idle, Vikings don't do idle, but relaxed in their own rugged, slightly suspicious way. A rower beside you leans back against a shield, stretching his arms until his shoulders crack like breaking branches. Good time, he says with a little sigh. Quiet time. You're startled to realize you haven't actually experienced quiet on this ship until now. Not like this, not without tension beneath it. All around you, small pockets of calm activity unfold. A few Vikings sit cross-legged near the mast. They're playing a game, little carved pieces moving across a wooden board etched with intersecting lines. One man slaps another's hand away from cheating, and the whole group laughs. The board looks handmade, polished smooth by years of use. What game is that, you ask? Neft AFL. One says proudly. King's Table. A strategy game, a Viking chess. You watch for a minute and decide you would lose instantly. Across the deck, two sailors practice light wrestling, not the dramatic kind, but a slow, controlled dance of grips and shifts. More like stretching with attitude. One slips. The other lets him fall with exaggerated flair. And both burst into laughter. A third Viking shakes his head and mutters, "Terrible form," like an ancient gym coach. Another man sits with a small wooden harp resting on his knee. He plucks gentle notes, soft, wistful, surprisingly delicate for fingers that have swung axes and rode through storms. The melody drifts across the ship like a warm breeze, turning the longship, just for a moment, into something softer than a war machine. You settle beside a Viking who is chewing calmly on a piece of dried fish. He points toward the horizon lazily. "Nothing for many miles," he says. "Best time to breathe." You take a slow breath with him. Salt, pine tar, sun-warmed rope, and, faintly, goat. Speaking of the goat, it's lying down finally, looking resigned to its strange nautical life. A rower gives it a gentle scratch behind the ears. "Ship goat now," he announces. The goat snorts. You're not sure if that's agreement or disgust. A few Vikings lie flat on their backs, staring at the sky. One traces shapes in the clouds with his finger. Another hums quietly. A third is already asleep, mouth open, snoring like a distant thunderstorm. His friend nudges him with a foot. "He sleeps anywhere," he says, "even during storms." You resist the urge to envy that superpower. Further along the deck, two sailors pass a waterskin back and forth, sipping slowly and telling stories so quietly you can barely make out individual words. Their tone is soft and thoughtful, memories, not bragging. Another Viking sits sharpening a small wood-carving knife, then pulls a block of wood from his pouch. Within minutes, tiny curls of wood gather at his feet as he shapes something, maybe an animal, maybe a runestone, maybe a gift for someone waiting far away. You ask him what he's making. He shrugs. "Don't know yet," he says. "Wood tells me later." You smile. Vikings and their wisdom again, half poetry, half mystery. Above you, gulls circle lazily, riding the warm air rising from the sea. Their calls are distant, almost sleepy. One Viking glances up and mutters, "Birds calm," means good day. After everything you've experienced, good day sounds like a priceless treasure. There's even a moment, rare and fleeting, when the entire ship falls into near silence. Just water. Just wind. Just the subtle creak of the mast. Just the warmth of the sun resting its weight gently across your shoulders. You feel it settle into you, that quietness, that peace. A Viking next to you notices your expression and chuckles softly. "Ocean not always fight," he says. "Sometimes she rests. We rest with her." Another Viking, older and quieter than most, sits beside you and begins braiding a cord from thin strips of leather. Without looking up, he says, "Long journeys need rest. Mind breaks before body if no calm." You nod. You've felt that truth already. A pair of younger rowers begin telling jokes, fast, snappy ones in Old Norse. You don't understand a word, but their gestures make it impossible not to laugh along. One mimics the goat slipping on deck. Another pretends to row in his sleep. A third jokes about the time he accidentally hit himself in the face with an oar. You catch enough tone and context to recognize universal comedy, self-inflicted pain. You sit with them for a while, sharing dried berries, stretching your sore legs, enjoying the camaraderie that thrives best in these fragile windows of calm. Vikings might be fierce, but they are fiercely social too. Life is hard out here. Rest is shared, not hoarded. A soft breeze rolls across the deck. The harp melody continues. Someone hums along. The goat sighs loudly in a very goat-like comment on the whole vibe. And for a little while, you simply exist. Not rowing, not bracing, not fearing, just being. The Vikings lean back, soaking in the calm, their faces softer than you've seen them. One taps the wood beneath him thoughtfully. Quiet moments make strong hearts. He murmurs, "Too much storm makes foolish men." Some historians still debate whether Viking voyages truly included restful downtime or whether modern imagination softened their reality. But sitting here in this rare, tranquil lull, you can feel the authenticity in your bones. Even warriors need peace. Even sailors need silence. Even Vikings need a moment to breathe. The longship drifts gently, sunlight rippling across its tar-dark hull. The ocean stretching out in infinite, shimmering calm. And as you rest among these rugged, laughing, humming men, you realize something profound. Survival isn't only about endurance. Sometimes, survival is about softness. The calm between storms. The breath before the wind changes. The quiet that keeps the soul from breaking. For now, you breathe with them. And the sea stays gentle. The calm doesn't break all at once. It unravels slowly, like a lazy animal deciding it's finally time to stretch. The breeze thickens. The waves pull a little deeper beneath the hull. The horizon sharpens, revealing a darker line that wasn't there before. You feel the shift before the Vikings say anything. Land. Not the small coastal hamlets you visited before. Not a trading outpost. Not a hidden cove. This is something larger, wilder, unclaimed. A place where the contours of hills rise like sleeping giants and forests loom in deep green strokes that spill all the way to the shore. A Viking near you looks up from sharpening his knife. He follows your gaze, blinks at the view, then nods knowingly. New land, he murmurs. Good land, or dangerous land, hard to tell. Hard to tell. A theme of this entire voyage. The captain stands at the bow, cloak snapping gently in the rising wind. His eyes scan the coastline with a focus you've come to trust implicitly. He isn't looking at the land itself, he's reading it. The angle of the waves hitting the rocks. The nesting of birds above the cliffs. The shadows where rivers empty into the sea. Signs you would miss even if someone circled them with red ink. He lifts a hand, signaling the crew. No shouting, just a gesture. The Vikings gather quickly, moving with that familiar unison that makes the longship feel like a single organism rather than 30 men. A rower beside you smirks. "We make camp today," he says, as though discussing something routine. "Stretch legs. Find food. Maybe hunt." Your eyes widen. "Hunt?" He grins. "Much easier than fighting ocean." You're not sure whether that's comforting. As the ship approaches the coast, the air changes again. The scent of pine drifts across the water, sweet, Fresh, unmistakable, something earthy follows it. Soil, moss, the smell of life on land. After so many days of salt and wind and tar, the scent hits you like a memory you didn't know you missed. The longship glides toward a sheltered inlet, the water darkening into a calm stretch that mirrors the sky. The Vikings row with slow, wide strokes now, careful, deliberate. Landing isn't just arrival, it's skill. Too fast and the boat shatters itself on hidden rocks. Too slow and the waves mock you for all eternity. The keel brushes against the sand with a soft, muffled kiss. The Vikings spring into action instantly, leaping into the ankle-deep water and pulling the ship further ashore. You follow, water soaking into your boots. It's cold, but solid. Ground beneath your feet feels unreal after so long on a moving deck. The shore is silent except for the rustle of trees and the cry of distant birds. The forest stands like a wall, towering pines, ancient oaks, thick undergrowth that promises both food and danger. A place untouched, unnamed. You watch as the Vikings claim the beach with quiet confidence. A few men scan the tree line, hands resting on their seaxes. Others unload the ship, barrels, tools, cloaks, sacks of grain, and of course, the goat, who steps onto land with the dramatic relief of a prisoner leaving confinement. It immediately eats a clump of grass, glaring at everyone as if demanding applause. A rower gestures for you to help carry a wooden crate. It's heavier than you expect, filled with rope, fishing lines, and spare tools. The Vikings grab gear with practiced ease, moving it onto the sand where they begin assembling camp. Within minutes, the beach transforms. A fire pit, a ring of stones, cloaks laid out to dry, weapons propped neatly in the sand, 2 men sharpening stakes, 3 gathering driftwood, someone rigging a tarp between 2 spears for shade. You join a small group tasked with gathering branches along the tree line. The forest greets you with cool, earthy air and a hush that feels almost sacred. Pine needles cushion your steps. Birds flutter above, curious but cautious. A Viking picks up a branch, snaps it in half, listens to the crack, and nods. Dry, good firewood. You gather an armful, feeling unexpectedly useful. Back at camp, the fire crackles to life. A Viking sets a pot over it, water, grain, dried fish pieces, wild herbs crushed between his palms. The smell slowly rises, comforting and familiar. You sit beside him as he stirs. Good land, he says quietly. Maybe stay a night, maybe 2. You ask, how do you decide? He shrugs. Land tells us. Food tells us. Weather tells us. Sometimes gut tells us too. Another Viking joins, carrying a bundle of straight branches. We make shelter, he says, dropping them with a thud. Sky says rain later. You glance upward. The sky looks peaceful to you. He raises an eyebrow. Look long, not quick. You stare harder, trying to see what he sees. After a moment, you notice faint smudges of darker clouds far off. Maybe he's right. Maybe he just wants something to do. The men begin building lean-to shelters, simple wooden frames covered with spare sailcloth, pine boughs, and cloaks. You help tie knots, though a Viking has to redo them twice. Good start, he says kindly. which you're pretty sure is Viking speak for absolutely terrible. But I appreciate the effort. Once shelter is ready, the crew splits into small groups. Some gather berries. Others scout for fresh water. A few head into the forest with bows and spears for small game. A pair walks along the shoreline searching for mussels or crabs. One man tests the wind direction again because that seems to be his hobby. Two Vikings invite you along on the freshwater hunt. You follow them through tall grass and across a rocky slope until you reach a narrow stream that flows from the forest into the sea. The water is clear, cold, dancing over stones like scattered silver. One Viking dips his hand in, tastes it, nods, good. Then he laughs at your horrified expression. "Don't worry," he says, "we boil for you first." You gather water in leather bags. Returning to camp as the hunters reappear carrying a pair of rabbits and something that looks suspiciously like a very annoyed grouse. The Vikings cheer lightly, nothing loud, just satisfied murmurs. Dinner is prepared with practiced efficiency. Meat roasting. Grain simmering. Wild herbs crushed. Smoke rising into the cooling evening. You sit with the crew in a loose semicircle around the fire. Shadows flicker on their faces. The smell of food fills the air. Sea breeze mixes with the scent of pine. For a moment, it feels timeless, like this scene has replayed itself across centuries. As the Vikings eat, they talk quietly about past landings. Once found island full of berries. One says. Once found bears. Another adds. Once found angry farmers. A third mutters, making the group laugh. Some historians still debate how often Vikings made temporary camps like this, choosing to pause their journeys not for pillaging, but simply to breathe, forage, mend, and rest. Watching them now, it feels natural, even essential. Traveling a medieval ocean wasn't a straight line. It was a series of pauses, recalculations, and small moments of peace. The sun begins to set, painting the sky in amber and violet. A Viking pats the sand beside him. "Good day," he says softly. "Hard world, but good day." You settle beside him, feeling warm, full, safe. And as night gathers around your quiet little camp on this unnamed shore, one truth settles deep inside you. Vikings didn't just journey across oceans. They touched the world gently where they could. One campfire. One shelter. One shared bowl of stew. At a time. Tonight, you belong to that world too. Dawn creeps into camp slowly, like it's tiptoeing around the sleeping Vikings out of respect. The embers of last night's fire glow faintly, casting a warm blush across the sand. A soft fog hugs the treeline, drifting low enough that everything looks touched by dream stuff. For a moment, you lie still beneath your makeshift shelter, listening to the hush of waves and the quiet breathing of the men around you. Then a goat bleats loudly and shatters the peace. Several Vikings groan. One throws a stick in the goat's general direction. It misses by about a mile. Another mutters something that's probably Old Norse for, "You menace." Morning has officially begun. But today's mood is different. There's a lightness in the air, a sense of expectation, even celebration. The Vikings move with a relaxed confidence as they rise. They stretch. They wash their faces with cold stream water. They sharpen tools, tidy the shelters, and prepare for something special. A feast. Not a gigantic, roaring, horn-raising feast of saga fame, no golden halls, no roasted boars, no drunken singing competitions, but a modest, meaningful feast meant for travelers who have survived storms, raids, hunger, exhaustion, and the stubborn personality of one ship-bound goat. A feast, by Viking standards, means food in abundance, food cooked slowly, food eaten together, food that tastes like relief. A rower claps you on the back as he passes. Big meal today, he says proudly. We celebrate safe land. Another adds, and good hunting, good fish, good fortune. A third points at the goat. Not you, not today. The goat looks smug about that. The preparations begin at once. Two hunters sharpen their knives and head into the forest for small game. A group of men gathers nets and wades knee-deep into the surf, casting them with practiced sweeps that look more like choreography than labor. The nets hit the water with satisfying splashes, fanning out beneath the surface. You join the fishing group, helping them pull the nets back in. The sea resists, tugging the ropes gently, playfully, like it's testing your strength. When the nets rupture through the surface again, they're heavy with silver, herring, mackerel, and a few larger fish that flash like mirrors in the morning sun. One Viking grins at you. Good catch. Ocean friendly today. You nod, remembering that yesterday the ocean nearly ripped the ship sideways. Friendly is relative. Back at camp, the hunters return carrying 2 rabbits and a pair of plump seabirds. One Viking raises them triumphantly. Feast begins. Work transforms into a flurry of activity. Fish are cleaned with swift, efficient strokes. Rabbits are skinned and placed in a clay pot lined with herbs. Birds are plucked, feathers drifting away on the breeze like tiny snowflakes. A few Vikings gather wild onions, sorrel, and fennel from the forest edge. Others start grinding barley with a handstone to make porridge thicker, richer, worthy of celebration. You help a group fillet the fish. One Viking shows you how to angle the blade, straight and clean along the spine. Your first attempt is enthusiastic but chaotic. Your second is passable. Your third earns an approving grunt. Good, you feed many, he says. Another Viking is mixing something in a wooden bowl. You peek over his shoulder. What is that? He holds up the bowl proudly. Butter with herbs. Herbed butter? You ask. Surprised. He shrugs. We like flavor too. A pot of stew is set over the fire, rabbit meat, wild greens, barley, sea salt, and a hint of whatever herbs they foraged. The smell rises slowly, earthy and warm, curling through the camp. More fish sizzle on hot stones set right in the fire pit. Skin crackling, oil popping like tiny sparks. A Viking sprinkles dried kelp over them, grinning when you raise an eyebrow. Good taste. Try. When you finally taste a piece, you're stunned. Smoky, salty, rich, better than anything you've eaten on the ship so far. Maybe better than most meals you've had on land, too. Meanwhile, one rower has taken responsibility for brewing the ale. It's not ale as you know it, more like a weak, fermented barley drink. He pours it into wooden mugs and passes them around. It smells faintly of apples and something vaguely sour. You sip it cautiously. It's not bad, not great either. A Viking sees your expression and laughs. This one weak, but safe. He taps your mug. Better than river water. Once all food is ready, the Vikings gather in a loose circle near the fire. They sit on cloaks, shields, driftwood logs, whatever's available. You take a spot among them. For the first time since the voyage began, you're not on a rocking deck or a cold plank. You're on earth, solid earth. A Viking lifts his mug. To sea, he says. Another adds, to storm survived. A third, to food. A fourth, to goat not eaten. Everyone laughs, and the feast begins. Food is passed hand to hand, shared generously. Chunks of roasted fish, stew ladled into wooden bowls, fresh greens seasoned with herbs, bread softened by broth, bits of rabbit so tender they fall apart before you can chew. There's no overeating, no gluttony, just steady, satisfied bites, quiet gratitude, warm camaraderie. As you eat, you notice how the Vikings savor each bite. They don't rush, they don't hoard, they don't measure portions. On the open sea, food is survival, but on land, food is celebration. Stories begin to flow, soft and steady like the tide. Tales of storms worse than the one you survived. Stories of lucky raids, unlucky gambles, long voyages, strange lands. Jokes about seasickness. Jokes about the goat. Jokes about each other. One rower tells a story about accidentally trading his boots for a chicken he thought was magical. Another Viking reminds him it wasn't magical. It was just sick. The whole group erupts in laughter. The captain sits with his crew rather than above them. His presence is calm, steady. He doesn't say much, but when he laughs, the entire group softens, like the world feels a little safer. Some historians still debate how often Vikings held feasts during their travels, whether these moments were weekly luxuries or rare events. Watching the men now, you can feel the truth. This isn't a feast of abundance. It's a feast of relief. A feast of being alive. You realize something simple and profound. Viking feasts weren't about excess. They were about enough. Enough food. Enough warmth. Enough company. Enough to remind them that life at sea wasn't only struggle. As the meal winds down, the sun leans lower, casting golden streaks across the shore. The Vikings lounge around the dying fire, bellies full, spirits light, shoulders relaxed. One Viking leans back on his elbows and sighs. "This," he says softly, "is why we travel." Another nods. Storms come, fights come, hard days come, but days like this. He gestures to the camp. The sea, the fire, the company. Days like this make all worth it. You sit with them, feeling the warmth of the fire seep into your bones. The softness of the earth beneath you. The gentle hum of shared satisfaction. In this fleeting moment on an unnamed shore, surrounded by men who have lived harder lives than you can imagine, you understand. Even Vikings, fierce, relentless, unstoppable, needed moments of quiet joy. Moments of rest. Moments of feasting after the journey. No matter how small. And today, you feasted with them. The feast fades slowly into memory. Like embers cooling beneath a blanket of ash. Evening slips across the shore. deep blue at the edges, lavender above the treeline, gold flickering on the waves. The Vikings douse the fire, pack their tools, shake sand from their cloaks, and begin preparing for the next chapter of the journey. It's time to go home. Not immediately, there's still a long voyage ahead, but the shift is unmistakable. The mood settles low and warm, like the glow of a lantern tucked beneath wool. Laughter softens, movement slow, voices lower. The air feels full of something you can't quite name, a mixture of relief, longing, and the quiet ache of distance. As the men lift the longship back into the water with practiced ease, you hear one of them sigh, not out of exhaustion, but out of something more emotional. "Good to see home soon," he says. It's not certain yet, but the word home has power. It pulls the whole crew like a tide. The longship glides free of the sand, rocking gently as it returns to its natural element. You step aboard, feeling the familiar sway beneath your feet. The goat hops in with surprising enthusiasm. Apparently the ocean is now preferable to land. That says everything you need to know about its personality. The Vikings find their places. Oars slide into position. You settle near the middle, cloak wrapped tight, watching as the coastline slowly shrinks behind you. The sky deepens into twilight. A sailor hums a soft melody. Not a work song this time, something softer. Something nostalgic. A Viking near you inhales slowly, looking out over the sea. "Long time gone," he murmurs. "Family wait, or hope." You glance at him. "Do they know when you'll return?" He laughs softly. "Never. Ocean decides, not us." There's no bitterness in his voice, just truth. Rowing begins again, but it's different now. The strokes are steady rather than urgent, like the crew is pacing itself for something important. Going home is not a sprint. It's reverence. The stars emerge one by one, lighting the sky with cold glittering sparks. A few Vikings tilt their heads upward, quietly reciting star paths to themselves. A rower points out a cluster of bright dots. "That one shows north," he says. "Home that way." Another Viking taps the side of the hull. "Ship knows the way." You're not entirely convinced the ship has built-in GPS, but you appreciate the sentiment. Hours pass. The ocean darkens into a velvet expanse. Occasional waves slap the hull, soft but steady, like reminders that the sea is still awake even if the world feels calm. You wrap your cloak tighter, watching the faint glow of the shoreline fade into nothing. That's when the stories begin. Not loud, not theatrical, just quiet tales shared by men whose thoughts have drifted toward hearths, farms, fjords, and faces waiting across the horizon. One Viking speaks of a small daughter who will have grown taller by the time he returns. Another remembers a brother lost at sea years ago, wondering if he'll feel his spirit in the waves on the way home. A third shrugs, saying he has no family except the men on this ship. "But that enough," he adds with a smile. You listen as the men share memories in the hush between strokes. The firelit bravado of feast stories melts into something gentler, nostalgia. Vulnerability. The soft ache of missing a life they left behind. A rower near the bow rubs a smooth wooden charm between his fingers. "It's shaped like a small fish. My mother made," he says, "for luck." You ask if it works. His smile is small but real. "Still alive, aren't I?" Another Viking quietly repairs a tear in his sleeve, muttering, "My wife be angry if I come home messy." The men around him tease him mercilessly, but all with warm affection. Even the goat settles down, curling beside a pile of bundles like it senses the shift in the ship's spirit. For once, it does not bleat. The sea stretches endlessly, a dark road leading toward memories and hopes. The Vikings row in silence now, save for the occasional grunt or splash of oar. Their movements grow more synchronized, tired bodies working in harmony toward one shared destination. At one point, a rower stops, lifts his hand, and gestures toward the horizon. "Look," he whispers. You follow his gaze. A faint shimmer. Lights dancing on the edge of the dark sky, green, pale gold, flickering gently like spirits drifting above the world. The northern lights. A murmur spreads across the ship. Some men smile softly. Others bow their heads. A few whisper quiet words of respect. The sky guides us home, one Viking says. Another nods. Good omen. You stare, breath held, as the lights ripple, a ghostly curtain waving in the upper darkness. It's beautiful, otherworldly, and carries a weight you can feel deep in your chest. Even the sea seems quieter beneath it. For a long time, no one speaks. Finally, when the lights fade, the rowing resumes, calm, steady, purposeful. Some historians still debate what Viking sailors believed the northern lights represented: spirits, shields, signs from gods, or simply natural phenomena. But watching the men now, the truth feels clear. It wasn't fear. It was reverence, a reminder that the world is bigger than storms and battles and hunger. A reminder that home lies somewhere beneath the same sky. As the night deepens, one Viking leans against the railing and murmurs, "Hard life, but good when going home." Another adds, "Home is where stories wait." You sit with them in the dim glow of starlight, wrapped in the hush of the ocean and the quiet hearts of men returning to something familiar. The longship glides forward, carrying not just supplies and tools, but longing, hope, exhaustion, and anticipation. A gentle swell lifts the hull. The oars dip in unison. The horizon pulls you closer. And you realize, the hardest journeys aren't about leaving. They're about returning. Tonight, you sail with men who have weathered storms, crossed distant shores, and now row toward warmth, hearths, and faces waiting at the end of the sea. The longship moves like a promise. And home, distant but certain, waits ahead. Dawn breaks slowly, soft, muted, almost shy, as if the sky itself understands that this morning is different. Not like the mornings when storms loomed, or when the ship trembled with hunger, or when the horizon meant only more ocean. Today, the horizon carries a promise. Home. The word drifts through the crew like warmth uncoiling after a long sleep. No one shouts it, no one boasts. Instead, the knowledge settles quietly in their bones. Men who have rowed through black water, patched planks in freezing spray, and slept on shifting boards now lift their heads with something gentler than relief. Something older, something earned. You sit near the bow, watching the faintest line of land emerge, just a smudge at first. Then a shape, then cliffs, then the familiar curves of fjord walls carved by time and wind and gods. You feel the ship itself lean forward, almost eager. A Viking beside you lets out a deep breath he didn't know he was holding. "Smell that?" he says softly. You inhale. The air carries a scent you didn't realize you missed: fresh pine, cold stone, the faint metallic note of mountain rivers. "Home air," he murmurs. The men begin preparing the longship for arrival. Not dramatically, not hurriedly, just with careful intention. Shields are polished and rehung along the rails. Cloaks are shaken free of salt. Hair is combed and braided. Tools are checked one last time. The goat, who somehow survived storms, raids, camps, and its own attitude, is brushed until its coat shines like it's about to audition for a medieval livestock commercial. The closer you get, the more the men's voices soften. Stories begin again, not of storms or battles or jokes whispered at midnight, but of what waits for them. "I hope my girl remembers my face. My son will be taller than me now. My brother said he'd brew a whole barrel when I return. My mother will scold me for leaving again. My father will pretend he did not worry." Some laugh, some stare into the distance, some blink a little too often. The fjord opens before you. Dark water turning glassy and still. The cliffs rise on both sides. Golden moss catching the early light. At the far end, tiny houses cluster like old friends leaning together. Smoke lifts from their chimneys, thin threads twisting into the morning air. A sailor touches your shoulder. Nodding toward the village. "We tell stories there," he says. "By fire. With family. With food. With warmth." His voice catches in a way that surprises you. The captain stands tall at the bow, no speech. No ceremony. Just a steady presence leading his men home. The village comes alive as people spot the ship. Figures gather along the shore. Waving, shouting, running. A child breaks into a sprint. A woman cups her hands around her mouth and calls a name. A man holds up his arms, laughing into the wind. The first Viking on board laughs so loudly the sound echoes off the cliffs. Another wipes his eyes without shame. A third thumps the deck and whispers, "Thank you," though you're not sure if he means the ship, the sea, or the gods. The longship glides into shallow water. Oars rise together. Silence falls, not heavy, not tense, but reverent. Then the keel touches earth. The Vikings surge forward, jumping into the water, splashing toward loved ones, pulling the ship farther ashore. Laughter, shouts, embraces. One man lifts his daughter into the air. Another is tackled by 3 small children. A woman runs straight into her husband's arms, nearly knocking him over. The goat escapes immediately and starts eating a villager's cabbage. No one stops it. Today, even chaos is welcome. You step onto the sand, watching joy ripple across the shoreline. You feel something warm settle inside your chest, a realization that you haven't been merely traveling with the Vikings. You've been living with them. The rower who taught you how to brace your feet waves you over. "Come," he says, "you eat with us." For the first time, you feel like you belong here, not as a visitor, not as a witness, but as part of the story. You stand on the edge of the fjord, watching the longship settle into its place by the shore, the same ship that carried you across storms. Stars, hunger, laughter, silence, fear, wonder. A vessel of wood and tar. A vessel of lives and memories. A vessel that has earned its rest. And as voices rise around you, welcoming, relieved, joyous, you understand. The Viking life wasn't only about what happened at sea. It was about who waited on the shore. Lives intertwined. Journeys shared. Stories carried home. And your journey with them is complete. End of script. Sweet dreams.